an uninhabitable planet, and a single woman has a Facebook profile picture with her sister. This is the Onion Week in Review. A groundbreaking study published Monday in the Journal of the American Medical Association confirmed that it is impossible to lose weight. No one has ever done it, and those who are trying should give up immediately. Researchers said that findings conclusively prove that shedding excess weight has never happened, changing your physical appearance is impossible, and that all sorts of exercises, personal training regimens, and diets will never, ever work.
Well, our test results conclusively prove that if you're going to the gym to lose weight, you will fail. You could work out every day and eat nothing and you still wouldn't lose an ounce. Skinny people will stay skinny, overweight people will be overweight. That's just how it is.
In other news, an area man is outraged his private information is being collected by someone other than advertisers. And a crowd cheers as this 93-year-old fuck-up finally graduates from college.
This is the Onion News Network.
Our Matrix server is about as free as internet chat can be. Join the existing rooms or create your own at chat.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live. Welcome to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. I'm Gardner Goldsmith, the creator of the Liberty Conspiracy, and you can listen to Liberty Conspiracy or watch it every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Rockfin, Rumble, my X/Twitter, which is at Gard Goldsmith. And now we're on YouTube, as long as they'll allow us to stay there. And if you want to get textual information at my Substack, remember, every Sunday I produce the Sunday News Assembly, which has at least 20 stories pertaining to liberty, plus contextual information that allows people to carry away some long-standing lessons. Thanks for listening, one and all. Newsflash time!
Monday saw the Palestinian Prisoners Club slap Israel with fresh allegations of medical neglect. The civil rights organization has accused the state of mistreating Palestinian detainees with serious health conditions.
Yes? Oh, hello. Hello. We're Mary's parents. Oh, well, come on in, fellas. Hold it a second. Mary's parents burned to death last year. Wait a minute! I know you guys! You're from the News Flash!
As Israel ramps up its offensive on Gaza, at least 27 Palestinians have reportedly been killed in an attack on the Nuseirat refugee camp in the enclave's central region. That as the Gaza death toll from IDF shelling surpasses 35,000 since October.
The News Flash!
First is the revelation by the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court that he will ask a panel of judges there to authorize the filing of an indictment against and thus arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, Defense Minister Gallant, and three leading Hamas leaders.
The News Flash!
Julian Assange, if you look at it very briefly, you say good, and it is good, but not good. They're saying that he's been granted by the London courts the right to appeal of extradition to the U.S. Well, big deal. He shouldn't have ever been arrested.
Yeah. Yes, my friends, it's time for a big excursion into the news flash. And I want to do something before we even explore all these news stories. I just want to offer you the opportunity to let you know how much I appreciate being able to communicate with you guys here. I look forward to this so much. I look forward to being in the chat with David Knight's audience. It's just awesome. And so I've been thinking about that over the weekend. And so, we explore crazy stories. We explore intense stories. We're on this planet for a blip. And I don't want to get too philosophical, but just want to say you all rock. I really appreciate what you're all doing out there. All right, let's everybody get into the first story. Can mention it briefly. Can't really speculate too much about this. Of course, it is about President Raisi and FM Emir Bandalanian die in a helicopter crash. That's the foreign minister. They have been found dead. They've been confirmed dead after a helicopter carrying those individuals and others crashed in a mountainous and forested area of the country in poor weather. Vice President Mohammed Mokbar will assume powers after Raisi's death. According to the Iranian constitution, in case of the president's death or incapacity, the first vice president will take over until an election is held within a maximum period of 50 days. So this is something that is leading many people to speculate as to whether or not this was just an accident or it was foul play, whether the president of Iran got the Ron Brown flight ticket, if you know what I mean. And as we know, there have been assassination attempts against the Slovakian president. There have been, of course, terrorist attacks inside Moscow that seem to have some sort of connection to Ukrainian and U.S./CIA connections. And so we're looking at this as well as an attempt by Americans, it seems, to try to overthrow the government of Congo over the past few days. So we don't know whether these things are connected, whether they are disconnected, but just the sadness and loss of a life of this man. I don't know much about his personality. I don't know much about the ups and downs of Iranian tyranny and the justice system there. But I will say this, that I can provide this comment from the United States side about United States observers. One, Ben Shapiro. I don't know if you got to see Ben Shapiro's comment about this man and others dying in the mountains. But Ben Shapiro said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, he said, so a helicopter carrying the president and foreign minister, but he just basically said the president, a helicopter carrying the president of Iran has crashed into the mountains. Such a loss of a good helicopter. I mean, just sometimes even if you've got the wit, don't use it. How about that? Be a little wiser than wittier. Just a disgusting display by that guy. Absolutely disgusting. So can't really speculate too much on it, but I'll leave it open to speculation for you here, everybody. I think it was probably foul play. And Anarchy Andrew says, Georgia is on my mind. Yes, Georgia as well. Yes, it looks like. And in fact, I think that Judge Napolitano was speaking with a couple of people about the future of Georgia and whether there will try to be a coup there. Anarchy Andrew says something is happening in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely right. And the details are super sketchy on that. I want to now get into, beyond mentioning the death of this man, the situation for Iran now. It's not going to change anything politically in Iran. And if the CIA folks who were probably behind this thought that it was going to do something, they're incredibly naive. I don't think they thought so. I think they were just being vindictive. I think that they clearly don't like the way things are going for Israel. I think the Israelis and the CIA are very close. And I think that after all, they've already assassinated people associated with the peaceful Iranian nuclear energy sector. They've tried to destroy nuclear facilities there that have nothing to do with developing nuclear weapons, and they've even infected their computers with viruses. So none of that stuff is good. All of it is dangerous, and it just shows you how lightly they take human life, because that definitely was connected with the United States and with Israeli intelligence. So they're essentially hand in glove, those two. And I don't know when to separate them, when it's fair to try to separate them or when it's not. So because I dislike them both. So it's difficult when you've got two hated agencies, the Mossad, 3, the IDF, 4, the Knesset in Israel, and 5, the CIA, and 6, the deep state, or the NSA, or the FBI. How about just the government of Israel and the government of the United States, plus many other governments, right? In the meantime, they're telling you it's for your own good, right? Yeah, we're going to cut off Iranian oil. We're gonna make sure that we have problems with the Houthis and that there's a problem in the Gulf, and now it's going to be harder to get oil, energy. We're going to block, as you saw last week, we're going to block Russian uranium. now, in addition to Russian energy exports like oil and natural gas, but it's for your good, and we'll replace it with greater technology. It is just, I wish we could put these people on trial ourselves, right? A people's court. That we need Judge Wapner back. Put all these governments on trial. In fact, let's get to the court section of the News Flash right now and talk about Julian Assange. I like it. What a great show. Again, a half-hour entertainment, just pure entertainment. Very simple, good stuff. A lot of good acting from those people on the stands as they would get all upset and everything. It was pretty good. So first, let's turn to Assange. We're going to go to Consortium News right now and then get some more video commentary from people like Danny McAdams and so on. Assange wins right to appeal on First Amendment issue. But again, this is the tricky thing about it. And I have something that I recorded from Stella Assange, which actually was tweeted by Julian Assange's brother. And it's something from the author of Darkness at Noon. What's his name? Kunstner. I think you'll find this pretty interesting in a minute. But the facade, you often hear color of law, right? That's all government is. It's all color of law, right? It does. This is the thing. People are like, well, that's not written down statute. So what? Even if it were written down statute, would it make a flying flip a difference? No, it's just people doing it on paper. So they give you this artifice. Oh, we got the Constitution. That's the law of the land. I didn't have anything to do with that. So why should I be held to the Constitution? Well, you're here. You haven't fled to some other place where they're going to take you out and take care of your rights the way we do. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Mafia Man. So none of it, you can take all the terms off it. Color of law is all that the polis ever does, because the difference is statute versus natural law. All statutes are color of law, all of them. That is undeniable. It's philosophically true, it's logically true, it's historically true, and it's theologically true. Everything the state does is done without someone's consent. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a polis. That's the point. It would be a voluntary association. So, therefore, everything the state does, it does under color of law, whether it's written down or it's made up by one of their bureaucrats. Doesn't matter, because the writing down was made up by other people. That's the point. And it doesn't matter whether you get so-called representation. That's a fraud. That's a fallacy. Mathematical representation is impossible. Real representation is impossible. And the state is always going to exist. It doesn't represent your interest. It represents its own interests. That's the point. So everything the state does in a generic normative sense on the term the state is color of law, period. It's inarguable. That's just the way it is. You get into a philosophy class and you go by the determination of color of law and you start to do the logical regress to it, you realize that even written statutes are color of law versus natural law. Natural law, God-given rights, negative reciprocity. That's it. And the government, the state, only exists by usurping your God-given rights and claiming they're doing it for your protection, right? So therefore, we've got this perfect example of the United States government operating under what many people would assume would be color of law with the Espionage Act. Patently, massively unconstitutional. First, even on their standards, there's no declared war, right? Second, this guy's a journalist. He had information. He didn't steal the information. It wasn't, in fact, the person who got the collateral murder videos was sworn to release information if it showed war crimes. Otherwise, that person would have been guilty of a war crime. So Chelsea Manning, then known as Bradley Manning, would himself have been a war criminal if he didn't give it to somebody. Then you've got the Vault 7 information, which really ticked off the CIA, and that seemed to be the trigger to going after Julian Assange. In fact, I think Daniel McAdams brought that up today on the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Okay? So this whole situation with Julian Assange operating on their pretext of the Espionage Act is completely spurious and has nothing to do with the Constitution. If one is to call the Constitution the law, that statute, the Espionage Act, is itself not a constitutional statute. So you can see how you get into this infinite regress. So let's say, hypothetically, the United States government were holding someone and they didn't have the Espionage Act and they wanted to prosecute someone, right? And they did it on, pick your example. They prosecuted some person for revealing state secrets, but they didn't even have an Espionage Act. Many people would say, well, that's under color of law. How dare you do that? There's no statute. And then someone else might say, even if there were a statute, how would that make it any better? Because the statute itself runs contrary to the First Amendment. Julian Assange is supposed to be protected by the First Amendment. It doesn't just apply to Americans. It is a proscription against Congress writing any law. And that law can apply to Americans or foreigners or anybody. The Espionage Act is such a law. It is unconstitutional, clearly unconstitutional. Julian Assange was a reporter. So in a moment, after we look at what his situation is, I just want to mention this again. If you look at the dance that these people have, they've got the Espionage Act, and then on top of that, one of the two key things in the Julian Assange case was that the the British High Court wanted assurances from the United States government that Julian Assange could use the First Amendment in his defense. And they didn't get that assurance. They got a fake assurance from the U.S. government that said, well, he can try. So in other words, it's sort of like saying, well, your attorneys can bring their briefcases in, but we'll decide there whether they can actually open them up and use what's in them. I mean, it's just a delay tactic. It means nothing. It's utterly meaningless. That's where we stand. The British court did allow Julian Assange to appeal his extradition specifically because the United States is not very solid on the First Amendment issue for him. So here it is. Assange wins right to appeal on First Amendment issue. The High Court in London ruled Monday that Julian Assange can appeal his extradition, which is going to take more months, and he's going to be stuck in the prison, in Belmarsh prison, until at least the fall, to the U.S. on the grounds that he is being denied his First Amendment rights. There are all the protesters down there on the Strand. Good job for them. The High Court on Monday in London granted Julian Assange the right to appeal the order to extradite him to the United States on the grounds that the U.S. did not satisfy the court that it would allow Assange a First Amendment defense in a U.S. court. Quote, we spent a lot of time listening to the United States putting lipstick on a pig, but the judges didn't buy it, Stella Assange told reporters outside the court building. As a family, we are relieved. But how long can this go on, as Devo would say in their cover of Working in a Coal Mine? The United States should read the situation and drop the case now. Now, as you know, the United States is perfectly comfortable. The Biden administration is perfectly comfortable with this delaying tactic because they want to push this past the election. They want this to go on, and they're hoping that the British court will take a very long time to actually start hearing this. And then the November elections will come along. Assange has been imprisoned in London's notorious Belmarsh prison for more than 5 years on remand pending the outcome of his extradition. He must now spend an untold number of more months in the maximum security prison awaiting the start of his appeal. He also did not appear today because they said he was not healthy enough. That is a very, very bad sign. Very bad sign. Now, I want to give you some background on this. Joe Lauria is the author on this piece from Consortium News, and you can find the link to this at Antiwar. Antiwar's topic on this just hyperlinks over. I'll show you what it looks like on the screen, in fact, right now, if you want to see it. So, of course, this is Antiwar, and if you click on Assange wins right to appeal on First Amendment, that'll bring you right over to the consortium piece. So here's the background. The High Court in London on March 26th had ruled that Assange had 3 grounds to appeal because, 1, his extradition was incompatible with his free speech rights enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. 2, that he might be prejudiced because of his nationality not being given First Amendment protection as a non-American. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're from Timbuktu. The Constitution is clear. There is no carve-out that makes it inapplicable for foreigners if the United States government is going to be silencing them or spying on them, like the Fourth Amendment. And 3, because he had inadequate protection against the death penalty. Without such protection, Britain cannot extradite him, according to its own statutes. Rather than proceed with the appeal on these 3 grounds, the High Court gave the U.S. the chance 4 years after the extradition process began to promise it would not use the death penalty and to guarantee Assange's free speech rights. Because it is an executive branch decision, which is very strange, the U.S. was able to assure the British government that it would not seek the death penalty, and Assange's lawyers on Monday said they did not contest that. Left unexplained, however, was why the British Home Office waited 4 years to seek what is normally a routine assurance of an extradition case, because they were doing the bidding of the CIA. That's why they wanted Assange to die. The free speech issue was more complicated because a decision about Assange asserting a First Amendment defense at trial will be up to a U.S. federal court and not the Department of Justice. Therefore, the DOJ could not issue such an assurance on the free speech issue. That ultimately led the 2 judges, Justice Jeremy Johnson and Victoria Sharp, to allow Assange to launch a formal appeal of his extradition because of an apparent violation of British extradition law based on the European Convention on Human Rights. Just wrap this up. It says that requires the receiving country to allow an extradited person the right to free speech. And finally this, Edward Fitzgerald KC and Mark Summers KC, barristers for Assange, easily picked apart 3 pieces of the presentation for the United States. They pointed out that the United States had misled the court by saying the United States assurance would allow Assange to rely on the First Amendment when, in fact, they actually say he can seek to rely on it. They also pointed out that the United States' attorneys had, they said, none of a slew of case law that the U.S. attorneys cited to supposedly bolster their argument to extradite Assange actually dealt with a trial, which, of course, Assange will actually deal with a trial if he goes to the United States. You can try to figure that one out. And the third one is very key, of course. And this is about Chelsea Manning. That saying Chelsea Manning was not able to invoke First Amendment rights in defense of leaking classified defense information meant Assange shouldn't be able to do so. Well, his defense attorneys, Assange's attorneys, are saying that's nonsense because Manning was a government whistleblower who had signed non-disclosure agreements, and Assange is a publisher. And again, Chelsea Manning had also sworn an oath to the Constitution, and Chelsea Manning understood what it meant if Chelsea Manning did not get that information out there that showed war crimes. So Chelsea Manning did the absolute right thing. There's a lot more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live coming up.
So the protection of life, liberty, and property is what the Free State Project is all about. But it's an effort to move 20,000 people who understand.
It's about demonstrating to the entire country
that, yeah, we can have a free market, a truly free market.
Making it just a freer, great place to live.
It's the world's largest voluntarist libertarian community, and it's only getting bigger.
That's amazing, to be able to move to a place where other people passionately believe in being free and independent.
What the Free State Project is managing to do, though, is to put their money where their mouth is. It's physically getting up across the country and saying, let's go someplace and let's demonstrate the power of these ideas. There's a lot of kind of philosophy that surrounds liberty. There's a lot of thinking about it and talking about it. But here in New Hampshire, people are doing it.
101 Reasons Liberty Lives in New Hampshire, a documentary by Free State Project Early Movers. Watch it free at 101reasonsfilm.com. 101reasonsfilm.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. The ruling comes as the United Nations top court continues its probe into whether Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Israel strongly denies the charges and the case brought by South Africa. William Denzelo reports from The Hague, where the ICJ is based.
It was an overwhelming ruling from the 15-member panel of the ICJ, 13-2, ordering Israel to cease its military operation in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. The ICJ has ordered Israel to, within a month, check back in to ensure they're complying with this order, also to allow unhindered access when it comes to UN investigators into Gaza going forward as well. Israel has long maintained that it is complying with international humanitarian law, and it's doing what it can to protect civilian life. But the message from the ICJ is overwhelming, that they say that Israel needs to do more on that front.
This comes as the United Nations resumes transporting humanitarian aid arriving at a US-built pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip. Deliveries were halted earlier this week for security reasons, while some aid was intercepted by Palestinians. In other news, Friday marks 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, where a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers in their classrooms in the U.S. state of Texas. Earlier this week, the families sued Texas state troopers for their delayed response to what is the worst school shooting in the state's history. Tony Waterman has more.
The families say the pain has been worsened by the lack of accountability over law enforcement's botched response. Officers waited 77 minutes to confront the gunman. A private investigator for the city of Uvalde cleared all local officers of wrongdoing earlier this year, and families are now anxiously awaiting the outcome of a grand jury investigation to see if any of the nearly 400 officers who responded will be criminally charged.
And fake accounts posting about the US presidential election are spreading across X, formerly known as Twitter, according to new research. A study, first published by Reuters news agency, monitoring posts on the social media platform, found a high proportion of accounts praising former President Donald Trump and criticizing President Joe Biden are not real. This comes as both presidential candidates ramp up their campaign efforts, with less than 6 months to go until Americans head to the polls. From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
You can stick it to the man and big tech. Join our FTL social mastodon at social.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Welcome back to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Watch us Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and my X at Guard Goldsmith. Entering into a segment when we talk about this color of law thing. I want to play for you William Kunstler back in the 60s. Sort of incorporates a lot of information about the United States basically using a supposed process to either delay justice for people or make it look like they gave them justice when the cards were actually stacked against them. And so this comes to us via Gabriel Shipton, who is Julian Assange's brother. And I want to play this for you because it's a very, very good statement. And I think Julian Assange fits right in with this. And I think Mr. Shipman probably agrees, which is why he posted this one. I recorded it this afternoon.
And that's the terrible myth of organized society, that everything that's done through the established system is legal. And that word has a powerful psychological...
Julian Assange.
Hold on a second. Sorry, I got to do one thing here. Got to pop this out. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, I'll do this just separately for a second here. Looks like we had something coming up on our screen here, so hold on a second. And yeah, I think it was something on our internet, so we'll get it rolling easily, though. Okay, yeah, that's good. All right, good stuff. Thank you, internets, for allowing me to stop you. Okay, So let's get back to Mr. Kunstler. Here we go.
And that's the terrible myth of organized society, that everything that's done through the established system is legal. And that word has a powerful psychological impact. It makes people believe that there is an order to life and an order to a system, and that a person that goes through this order and is convicted has gotten all that is due him, and therefore society can turn its conscience off and look to other things and other times. And that's the terrible thing about these past trials, is that they have this aura of legitimacy, this aura of legality. I suspect that better men than the world has known, and more of them, have gone to their death through a legal system than through all the illegalities in the history of man. 6 million people in Europe during the Third Reich, legal. Sacco Vanzetti, quite legal. The Haymarket defendants, legal. The hundreds of rape trials throughout the South, where black men were condemned to death, all legal. Jesus, legal. Socrates, legal. And that is the kaleidoscopic nature of what we live through here and in other places. Because all tyrants learn that it is far better to do this thing through some semblance of legality than to do it without that pretense.
Very good. Boy, that's great. And by the way, I'm thinking William Kunstler was an attorney. I think I'm thinking of Arthur Kunstler, who wrote, or Arthur Kessler, who wrote Darkness at Noon. William Kunstler was a civil rights lawyer. He represented the Chicago 7, I think. So, yeah, good stuff from Julian Assange's brother. And, you know, we'll just cross our fingers. It's going to take months. And I think that the key thing is just trying to keep him alive in there, and so his kids can see him someday outside the walls of a prison. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You know, under a anywhere where there is just the ability to move with his kids and lift him up and look at the sky. You know, jeez. I mean, you make accommodations in terrible situations. So many people do, but boy, it is really something. Jeez, oh golly. Let's now turn to Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams because I want to get some more from them about this. And you saw a little clip of that in our news flash preview. But here's Ron Paul as well with Daniel McAdams.
Julian Assange, if you look at it very briefly, you say good, and it is good, but not good. They're saying that he's been granted by the London courts the right to appeal of extradition to the U.S. Well, big deal. He shouldn't have ever been arrested.
Yeah. Well, it is. Yeah, I think you're right, Dr. Paul. It's a minor victory in a way. Let's put on the first one. This happened just this morning while we were getting ready for the program. There's this Politico's write-up. Julian Assange wins right to appeal U.S. extradition. And it's somewhat complicated. If you go to the next one, this gives you a little bit better of an explanation. But the court's ruling Monday will further delay any removal of Assange and mean his legal status continues to be disputed. Legal argument Monday focused on the issue of whether Assange would be allowed First Amendment protections. Now, as our viewers will remember, the High Court in London requested the U.S. to give several assurances, one that he wouldn't face the death penalty, and the other that he wouldn't be denied First Amendment privilege based on his nationality. Now, that second part is the one that apparently they are not satisfied with. It's weasel words that the U.S. government did. They're very cocky. They're very assured because they didn't say you can have First Amendment rights, which is what the court demanded. They said you can appear before our court and ask for First Amendment rights. So no guarantees. And that's the basis for this.
Isn't it sad? 14 years this has been going on, and it is our judicial system that is the real problem. Assange is not is not American. He's Australia, and they're claiming that he broke the law in what he had printed on, in his journalism. So,
okay, and what I think also is extremely dangerous is when you get these superficial, this parade of flag waving and Espionage Act stuff and claims that, oh, you're siding with the terrorists, and the rhetoric of Ben Shapiro and the people who are accusing those people who are protesting at college campuses of being pro-terrorist. You're pro-Hamas, you're pro-terrorist. This sort of nonsense. Even politicians saying that to people, to students, as we saw with the woman from New York, the so-called Congresswoman from New York. And by the way, she just spoke in front of the Israeli parliament. We'll show you that information as well. Calling up the heads of universities, not bringing up the fact that they're operating in a fascist way, giving the universities money contrary to the Constitution and they're owes to it. No, all of that is just an artifice. It's the wording. It's this rhetoric. And you can see how stories like the monsters are due on Maple Street from the Twilight Zone, where everybody is accusing each other of being an alien or a monster and so on and so forth. You can see how it degenerates. You can see how people squealing on their neighbors, or in the case of 1984, children squealing on their parents. And this has happened in states, right? Getting benefits and going out and becoming, Nazi youth, that sort of thing. Being like George Soros, a 14-year-old kid going out there and helping the Nazis get other people's property and round up people, and him saying it was one of the most wonderful times or the most wonderful time of his life, somehow idyllic. You can see how this degeneration of terminology, once it's applied, it gets thrown around at everybody, right? And when the state is at stake, they will use it to go after anybody. And it really hurts my heart to think how conservatives have bought into this. Everything from so-called hate speech, which they used to use in an ironic way. And I try to warn people, don't even use it ironically. Don't even say, oh, now you're engaging in hate speech, because that normalizes it. Pro-terrorist, that normalizes it, right? Espionage. What the heck is espionage? I don't know. What is espionage? If you're pro-Constitution, that means that you're anti-U.S. government right now. Does that mean you're involved in some sort of espionage or some sort of delinquency, some sort of apostatism to the state? Does that mean you're treasonous? Is Naked Raygun going to sing a song about you someday? Right? Great song, by the way. How does that work? Because they control the rhetoric. They control the language. And this is the problem. The courts, all of the legal apparatus, everything from the very origin of the state claiming it's there for your protection. Well, if it's there for your protection, there are going to be a lot more things that it brings up that might threaten the state that they will claim they've got to cut out for your protection. And if people buy into this rhetoric, I've heard people claim that Julian Assange is some sort of bad guy. Like, no, he is not a bad guy. Everything that was done to this guy was bad. Even the trumped up rape charges, those were exceptionally bad. And they finally fell apart. And we've got people talking about how, oh, you can't go on this campus and you're pro-terrorist and so on. Benjamin Netanyahu was pro-Hamas. But you can't bring that up. Evidently, this logic doesn't apply when they can bandy around these terms. It's just like when they were saying, oh, well, if you're not jabbed, you're putting everybody at risk. It is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. No, it's not. And I'm not putting somebody else at risk if that person is voluntarily associating with me. Leave me alone. It is just incredible. Let's check out the chat real quick. See what people have to say. I see here, Harry Hart says the U.S. lies about everything. Yeah, so do most governments. The U.S. and the U.K. are particularly egregious on that. Douglas got some thunder showers coming in. Hope you keep power, buddy. Freegan says conservatives are the new libtards. Well, neocons are, and even some traditional conservatives, because you got the tradition. This is where the neocons play upon the Christian Zionists, and they help pull them in. It was the same thing with the anti-communist stuff back then. There was this idea, well, communism is so bad. Christians, well, traditionally, we got to support Israel. We have to support Israel. And I said that to my mom. I was like, Mom, if you want to sign a check to the state of Israel, you go ahead, but don't force somebody else to do it. I thought you were a Christian. She's like, oh, yeah. So she was always open to conversation on stuff like that. Okay, now let's turn to another facet of the legal side of things, okay? So on the legal side of things, let's turn back to antiwar.com and go into the Netanyahu story, which is a much bigger sign for me that perhaps nothing will be done. I'm sorry, but probably nothing will be done. But I think it is important to bring this up because, again, things are unraveling for Netanyahu. There were massive protests over the weekend all over Israel. And here it is. ICC seeks arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. Biden said the ICC's action against Israeli officials was outrageous. Really? Does that mean that it's outrageous because somehow you think it doesn't apply to them? Or is it outrageous because now you could be implicated because you've been giving them weapons? On Monday, the International Criminal Court announced it was seeking arrest warrants for senior Israeli and Hamas leaders for so-called war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel and the relentless Israeli bombing campaign and starvation blockade on Gaza that has followed. And we've got some information on that to bring to you. Karim Khan, the ICC's chief prosecutor, said his office was seeking warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. In a statement, Khan alleged the Israeli leaders were responsible for the following crimes. 1. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare as a war crime. It was stated that that was one of their objectives. Gallant said it before all of this started. 2. Willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, contrary or cruel treatment as a war crime. Their mention of the Nakba, that also implicates them. Willful killing or murder as a war crime. Again, Nakba. Intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as a war crime. Again, Nakba. Because they were saying we're going to have Nakba too. Extermination and or murder, including in the context of deaths caused by starvation as a crime against humanity. Again, ditto. Persecution as a crime against humanity. They were doing that before October 7th. And yes, that persecution has continued with hundreds of people being held without charge and no due process in Israeli prisons, some of them young teenagers. Other inhumane acts as crimes against humanity. Absolutely right. Khan said, quote, "We submit that the crimes against humanity charged were committed as part of a widespread and systematic attack against the Palestinian civilian population pursuant to state policy. These crimes, in our assessment, continue to this day. The action by the Hague-based court came despite pressure from the U.S. not to pursue Israeli officials, including a letter from 12 Republican senators that threatened sanctions. You remember this one. They said, you watch it, essentially, that threatened sanctions or other action in response. Again, sanctions. Find that in the Constitution. The Biden administration also made its opposition known to the ICC's plans, despite supporting the court against Russian President Vladimir Putin for similar charges. Not as egregious, but you probably remember the U.S. helped push that stuff. And the U.S. isn't even signatory to the ICC. In a statement responding to the ICC, President Biden called its action against Israel outrageous. Really? Okay, if you say so. Now, let's hear from representatives, wink, wink, so-called Stefanik, in Israel, as we see the great reporting of none other than Dave DeCamp.
Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, May 20th, 2024. So the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Representative Elise Stefanik slams Biden at the Israeli Knesset. So Representative Elise Stefanik, she is a Republican from New York, and she delivered a speech at the Israeli Knesset on Sunday where she slammed President Biden and called for unconditional military support for Israel to support the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. So Stefanik and other Republicans have been furious with President Biden for putting a pause on one single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs and threatening to withhold heavy weapons if Israel launched a major attack on population centers in Rafah. Of course, he still hasn't taken any action, and Israel continues to escalate in Rafah. But regardless, they're freaking out. And Stefanik goes over to the Israeli Knesset, to a foreign nation's parliament, to criticize the president. She said, quote, "I have been clear at home and I will be clear here. There is no excuse for an American president to block aid to Israel, aid that was duly passed by the Congress, or to ease sanctions on Iran, paying a $6 billion ransom to the world's leading state sponsor of terror, or to dither and hide while our friends fight for their lives," end quote. And she said this at a meeting of the Knesset's Caucus for Jewish and pro-Israel students on campuses around the world. That's the name of the caucus. And so the $6 billion that she said there, when she mentioned Iran, she was referencing a prisoner swap deal that the U.S. and Iran made last year before October 7th. Under the deal, the U.S. and Iran each swapped prisoners, and the U.S. graciously allowed Iran to access $6 billion of its own money. And you know, you hear Republicans say this, that Biden gave Iran $6 billion, but that was their money that was frozen in South Korea because of U.S. sanctions, because of the Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal.
Exactly. I've been trying to tell people this for so long. And conservatives just anything that the United States gives to Iran, whether it was taken through criminal means, like holding the money, somehow the United States should keep it. So these people want to become parties to more criminal acts. Just incredible. It doesn't belong to the United States government. Nothing belongs to the United States government. That money didn't belong here. It shouldn't have been here. And this woman, Stefanik, is unbelievable that she thinks that what's really upsetting is not what's going on in places like Rafah. And we're going to show you some information on that to contrast what she's saying. But the fact that the U.S. government isn't giving weapons fast enough and sufficiently to her bloodthirsty, very, very wonderful preferences.
So under the deal, they would transfer that $6 billion to Qatar, and then they would allow Iran to access it from there. The U.S. and Qatar said that they, after October 7th, that they decide to freeze the money again. So it's not even clear if Iran ever even had access to it, because this deal happened in September. And then a month later, they said that they weren't going to let Iran access the money. So, but it doesn't matter. This is a talking point that you see from Republicans all the time. So I just figured I would explain it. So anyway, Stefanik declared that the U.S. should provide Israel with, quote, what it needs when it needs it without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil, end quote. So despite the Republican outrage at President Biden, his administration has promised that Israel will get every penny of the $17 billion in new military aid that was recently authorized by Congress. So Stefanik also praised former President Donald Trump for his strong support for Israel when he was president, his historic support for Israel, as she put it. And Trump...
It's just incredible. Unbelievable. You've got Trump, Biden, and RFK, massive Zionists. Just incredible. And of course, the supposed debates are going to have two Zionists questioning them. And of course, RFK Jr. is not even going to be there. Just ridiculous. And even as this woman and so many conservatives, they're very upset that President Biden claiming that Biden gave $6 billion to Iran, but of course, as he mentioned, it's unclear if Tehran ever had access to the U.S., and Qatar agreed to freeze that again in October 2023, not long after the deal was made. They want to send over every penny of $17 billion in your money to Israel. This is how flipped over this is. And they don't get it. They think they've got some sort of moral high ground. It is just blindingly bad.
Has been running on an extremely pro-Israel platform, and he has claimed that President Biden abandoned Israel by issuing that warning about Rafah. So the reason why I wanted to make this the top story today is, first off, I mean, again, it is like just imagine an American politician going to any other country's parliament to, try to score political points against the president, But also, I think this is kind of going to be the theme for the next few months as Republicans and Trump, as the election is coming up, it's going to be, they're just going to try to be as pro-Israel as possible. And Stefanik also slammed American college students who are protesting the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. She's actually been leading the charge in Congress in making these accusations of anti-Semitism, despite the fact that many Jewish students are participating in the protests. She said in her speech, quote, "I led the charge to expose this moral rot of anti-Semitism infecting our supposed most elite higher education institutions." She was the one. So there was that hearing in the House where they had like the presidents of Harvard. I forget what colleges. It was kind of like a viral moment. Of her asking them, if students call for genocide, does that violate the college's rules? And they didn't really have an answer. That was because right before that line of questioning, Stefanik established that she thought, the slogan "from the river to the sea" and calling for an intifada was a call for genocide, which is just completely ridiculous.
Exactly.
So those, then she goes and says, so you see what she established as a call for genocide. With that context, it totally changes the what they're discussing in that hearing. But of course, that context wasn't clear to most people who saw that clip.
And of course, unfortunately, the heads of those great towers of higher education also were unaware of the origin of the phrase and the fact that it's not anti-Semitic to call for peace and actually ask that perhaps Jewish people be heard when they're protesting on a campus that is taking government money and then implicates everybody in the tragedy of the commons. Again, the lesson in political economics and philosophy is very clear here. It is outstandingly clear, and it's undeniable. When the government takes people's money and funds something, it then gets everybody arguing against each other over what can be done in that place that's receiving the government money. So how about don't take people's money and you won't run into that problem? How about just stick to the moral prerogative of leaving one's neighbor alone? There's a lot more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live coming up.
Never, ever send a follow-up email asking, "Did you get my email?" Email 101. If it didn't bounce back undeliverable, it got where you sent it. And avoid transmedia pestering, like calling to ask, "Did you get my email?" or emailing to say, "I left you a voicemail." If your emails and voicemails aren't being acknowledged, your problem isn't technology, it's technique. Is your message concise and understandable? Have you boiled it down to seem as relevant as possible to the recipient? In other words, is it the opposite of spam or junk mail? All of this really matters if you're a job seeker. But even if you're not, with money and attention so scarce now, effective communication skills have never been more important. For more tips, hit survivalspeech.com. I'm Holland Cook.
So you've signed the Shire Society Declaration and are planning your move to New Hampshire to be around more liberty-oriented people. Next, sign up for the Shire Society Forum at forum.shiresociety.com. There are a bunch of people there who are already in the Shire, and they want to meet you. If you're already in the Shire physically, you should also come by the forums. Remember, not everyone uses Facebook. New people are signing up for the Shire Society Forum every month, so drop in and say hello at forum.shiresociety.com. Tired of cancel culture? Sick of mega tech corporations holding an axe over your head? Join the LRN.FM Matrix chat server. It's self-hosted, so no one else can tell us what to do or say. Don't like the existing channels? You can make your own. You can even connect into some of our channels from other Matrix servers. It's federated. For the full LRN.FM Matrix experience, though, you should join our server via the step-by-step instructions at chat.lrn.fm. Chat.lrn.fm.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 2 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. The ruling comes as the United Nations top court continues its probe into whether Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Israel strongly denies the charges and the case brought by South Africa. William Denzelo reports from The Hague, where the ICJ is based.
It was an overwhelming ruling from the 15-member panel of the ICJ, 13-2, ordering Israel to cease its military operation in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. The ICJ has ordered Israel to, within a month, check back in to ensure they're complying with this order, also to allow unhindered access when it comes to UN investigators into Gaza going forward as well. Israel has long maintained that it is complying with international humanitarian law, and it's doing what it can to protect civilian life. But the message from the ICJ is overwhelming, that they say that Israel needs to do more on that front.
This comes as the United Nations resumes transporting humanitarian aid arriving at a US-built pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip. Deliveries were halted earlier this week for security reasons, while some aid was intercepted by Palestinians. In other news, Friday marks 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, where a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers in their classrooms in the US state of Texas. Earlier this week, the families sued Texas state troopers for their delayed response to what is the worst school shooting in the state's history. Tony Waterman has more.
The families say the pain has been worsened by the lack of accountability over law enforcement's botched response. Officers waited 77 minutes to confront the gunman. A private investigator for the city of Uvalde cleared all local officers of wrongdoing earlier this year, and families are now anxiously awaiting the outcome of a grand jury investigation to see if any of the nearly 400 officers who responded will be criminally charged. Tony Waterman, Texas.
And fake accounts posting about the US presidential election are spreading across X, formerly known as Twitter, according to new research. A study first published by Reuters news agency monitoring posts on the social media platform found a high proportion of accounts praising former President Donald Trump and criticizing President Joe Biden are not real. This comes as both presidential candidates ramp up their campaign efforts, with less than 6 months to go until Americans head to the polls.
I love it, Donald Trump. It's my favorite presidente. I love him.
Trump's presidential campaign is turning its focus to African American and Hispanic communities. At least 1,000 people attended the former president's rally in the Bronx in New York City on Thursday. Mitch McCann reports.
Donald Trump's venue for Thursday's rally was an unusual location for a Republican. No GOP candidate has won New York since Ronald Reagan back in 1984. But in the Bronx, Trump focused on New York life, promising to make the city affordable again and to clean up the subway system. Trump says he will do that so it no longer looks like it hasn't been cleaned since 1932. The former president also focused on African American and Hispanic voters. Trump blamed President Joe Biden for problems facing those communities. African Americans are getting slaughtered. Hispanic Americans are getting slaughtered, he said. Ahead of November's election, Trump says those communities can rely on him to improve their lives. Mitch McCann, New York.
And the French president says riot-hit New Caledonia will not become the Far West. Emmanuel Macron was speaking after a visit to the French overseas territory, which has been hit by more than 10 days of deadly unrest. On Friday, another death was confirmed after a man was shot by police, bringing the total number of fatalities to 7. To recap the top stories, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. Memorial events are taking place in the U.S. state of Texas to mark 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. And new research shows fake accounts posting about the U.S. presidential election are spreading across social media platform X. That's the latest Feature Story News. Sally Patterson reporting.
Well, our own Rebecca Mera takes us on a tour of the Olympic Village.
We have a full-size bed, lounge area, showers, plenty of space, which is great because I'm constantly having sex in there.
The Village is a temporary home to the world's most physically impressive athletic men and women. It was important to the Olympic Committee to give them a comfortable, state-of-the-art area to each other's brains out while they're not competing.
We have a pool where they can have a sex, a theater where they can have a sex. All these athletes are hot, horny, ready to go. They deserve the best.
I was in Vancouver where I got eaten out by this French speed skater. I have to say, these facilities are even better, and I'm going to try to a Japanese guy.
You've spared no expense.
These athletes deserve the best. They sacrifice so much for their countries. They deserve to be able to until their and can't take it anymore.
And these facilities won't go to waste. Once the Olympics are over, they'll be converted to a resort where Russian businessmen can come to their prostitutes.
This is the Onion News Network.
Don't miss a moment of Free Talk Live. Get our archives daily via our podcast at feeds.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Welcome back to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Watch us Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and my X at Guard Goldsmith. Netanyahu has openly stated, and so has Gallant, they've openly stated that they want to sweep everyone away. Well, now, guess what? Netanyahu's changing his tune. Over the past 24 hours, Tova Lazaroff reports for the Jerusalem Post. A real stunner from the man who cannot be believed in any way whatsoever. You know, he who shall not be named? Well, here is the man who cannot be believed. Here is the story. Israelis won't be able to rebuild settlements in the Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian Authority won't be able to control the enclave. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Tuesday night in an interview with CNN. Really? He says, resettling Gaza, that was never in the cards. Did you get that? That was never, so when you heard him say that they were going to settle all of Gaza, that isn't actually what he was saying. When he was saying from the river to the sea, he didn't mean that at all. He meant kind of from the river to the sea, little spots here and there where Israel will be continuing to encroach according to his plan. It's amazing. You can't believe anything this guy says. And of course, just last week, they write here, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir called for the construction of Israeli settlements in Gaza. That would be Netanyahu's national security minister, who still works for Netanyahu, called for the construction of Israeli settlements in Gaza and the voluntary, wink, wink, emigration of Palestinians from the enclave, you know, after everything's been turned to powder. You want to volunteer to leave? Yeah, come right this way. Well, we got a nice pier waiting for you. Let me just figure this out. If you can, do you have a right to be an occupying force? I'm just wondering how the two can comport, because my head, there's this stuff in my skull, and it just seems to have a problem with trying to actually make those two work together. Isn't that a strange one? I don't get it. But anyway, while Israel would need to retain security control of Gaza to prevent the resurgence of terrorism, there were no plans to reoccupy it, Netanyahu told CNN. So they would be policing and occupying it, but they wouldn't be occupying it. I see. It would still be the occupied territories, but not with settlements, just controlled completely as it was previously when they controlled the water, controlled the electricity, and of course, people had to get food shipments even a few years ago because they couldn't maintain their own livelihoods in Gaza because, of course, of the police state that Israel was imposing. So it'll be occupied, but not reoccupied. You know what I'm saying? I don't think I do either. I don't think he does. There were no plans to reoccupy it, to reoccupy the occupied that they're going to occupy. Get it? I hope you do. Reiterating his opposition to building settlements in Gaza. It's just going to be rubble. The whole thing's going to be rubble. I said so openly, he said. Some of my constituents are not happy about it, but that's my position. He's got a plan for peace. Netanyahu dismissed the possibility that the Palestinian Authority could control Gaza once the war ends and Hamas no longer rules the enclave. Remember the Hamas that he supported to rule the enclave, which it forcibly seized in 2007 when it ousted Fatah with Israeli support. The Palestinian Authority still teaches its children to seek the destruction of the Jewish state? Really? Well, okay. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, this is from, of course, the Jerusalem Post, and Minister without portfolio Benny Gantz have taken Netanyahu to task for failing to provide a plan for what will happen in Gaza once the war is over and Hamas is defeated. And, of course, the plan is, of course, to occupy it and get as many people as they can out of there because they just don't want them there. Now, I want to take the opportunity now to show you a little something. I'm going to show you the article. Last night, and I was in David Knight's chat. Last night, I spent many hours, actually, even before the show, searching for something that I saw over the weekend among all of the many videos that I watch. And I saw something, and I thought, man, that is a very big video clip. That's a big one. It was from Sky News. Didn't know. I was like, man, who's that person? Couldn't see who it was. And I forgot which of the shows. I'm like, man, is it from Grand Theft World? Did I see it from Jimmy Dore? Did I see it on Redacted? Was it Kim Iverson? Was it the Judge Napolitano? Where did I see this thing? I didn't see. Well, leave it to David Knight. Today, he got it. He put it out there, and it is absolutely essential. And I wanted to show it to you yesterday, and I couldn't find it. I spent hours after the show last night going through my history, going through videos within that history, scrolling through things, trying to find it. I just couldn't find it. Hours and hours and hours and hours. And David and Travis and the David Knight Show, they found it. Here is the news story from which it is derived. Mediaite actually has this. David Gilmour, not the Pink Floyd guitarist, writes, Sky News host, this is from April 25th, goes back a ways, but it's very pertinent. Sky News host, it shows you how things are unraveling. They can't even keep their lies straight. Oh, we have a fly in here. I hope it's not Brundlefly, Seth Brundle. Sky News host grills Israeli envoy on claim Gazans in mass grave are probably terrorists killed in battle. And she asks a very pertinent question. How do they fight with hands tied? Oh, it looks like I've got to wait for this page to load properly. I hope I'm still going okay here. Let me just double check on my video feed to make sure that we are good. Yes, we're good. Okay. So I'm going to dump this page and go directly over to the video that I've got. All right. So, and I have another one from Sky News actually in just a little bit that has to do with the ICC and the war crimes. And it's rather light, but it is interesting nonetheless. All right. So here is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and she also serves as Foreign Ministry Special Envoy of Israel, Fleur Hassan Nahum, on Sky News, April 25th, talking about how she thinks that people who were zip-tied and found with bullets in their skulls, shot in the back of the head, somehow they were shot because they were terrorists. Get it? Okay, here we go.
At least 283 corpses found in a mass grave at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The UN Human Rights Chief has said he is absolutely horrified. Who do you think those bodies are?
Probably terrorists, because the ratio of combatant to innocent that Israel has is unprecedented in modern warfare. We know we've killed about 15,000 terrorists. There was a terrible battle in those areas. So the chances are...
How do you think these people died?
In gun battles with Israel.
Why do you think some of the bodies were found with ties around their hands?
Well, because we probably arrested the terrorists.
And then killed them?
Well, I don't know if the terrorists fought back. I wasn't there. But all I can tell you is that this has been a very difficult urban warfare, that nobody on earth has experienced this type of warfare, where the terrorists are hiding in tunnels, where they're cowards because they won't face their enemy. They just leave innocent people up there whilst they hide in tunnels that are bigger than the London Underground. And they come out, they shoot, and it could be that many of them were shot and they were shooting in a battle. And it could be that there were bombs thrown by them and grenades. There could be a million different scenarios of why these were found. But remember, we're in the middle of it all.
I just to clarify for me, if you would, how do they fight back with their hands tied behind their backs?
Well, we don't know what they were doing before their hands were tied behind their backs, do we?
No, but if you've managed to cable tie them, they shouldn't subsequently find them dead, should we?
And maybe, again, we're just conjecturing. Maybe his friend threw a grenade, and then what happens? Maybe there was a missile, maybe they threw a rocket, and then what happens? Again, this is conjecture. I wasn't there, you weren't there. We can't know. All I know is that our army has the highest...
Neither was Amnesty International, and they say there's been a lack of access for human rights investigators.
It's a shame that they're not worried about the lack of access to hostages who haven't been visited.
Come on to hostages in a moment. That's also on my list to talk to you. But what would you say to Amnesty International saying there's been a lack of access for human rights investigators?
We're in the middle of a war. They want access. They'll have access after the war. How could we let them in? Let's say we let them in and 3 of them get killed. And then what happens? Who's to blame?
Yeah, this is such a classic example of a person squirming, trying to come up with every possible excuse. It doesn't make any sense. And then finally the go-to is, well, you don't understand. This is war. We've never seen anything like this. So if I'm not making any sense to you, I don't have to make sense to you because this is war. Answer, done. I'm not going to say anything else. Oh, I don't hear you. This is such a perfect example of how they can't even keep their lies straight. Things are unraveling so badly for the Israeli government there, and appropriately so, as they have utterly destroyed almost 40,000 lives. And of course, who knows how many more they've left permanently injured. They've destroyed their property. An incredible legacy of brutality.
At least 283 corpses found in a mass grave at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. The UN Human Rights Chief has said he is absolutely horrified. Who do you think those bodies are?
Probably terrorists, because the ratio of combatant to innocent that Israel has is unprecedented in modern warfare. We know we've killed about 15,000 terrorists. There was a terrible battle in those areas. So the chances are...
How do you think these people died?
In gun battles with Israel.
Why do you think some of the bodies were found with ties around their hands?
Well, because we probably arrested the terrorists.
And then killed them.
Well, I don't know if the terrorists fought back. I wasn't there. But all I can tell you is that this has been a very difficult urban warfare, that nobody on earth has experienced this type of warfare, where the terrorists are hiding in tunnels, where they're cowards because they won't face their enemy. They just leave innocent people up there whilst they hide in tunnels that are bigger than the London Underground. And they come out, they shoot, and it could be that many of them were shot and they were shooting in a battle. And it could be that there were bombs thrown by them and grenades. There could be a million different scenarios of why these were found. But remember, we're in the middle of it all.
I just to clarify for me, if you would, how do they fight back with their hands tied behind their backs?
Well, we don't know what they were doing before their hands were tied behind their backs, do we?
No, but if you've managed to cable tie them, they shouldn't subsequently find them dead, should we?
It's just amazing. So, of course, if you've got them zip tied, you don't have to shoot them in the head. And if you've shot them in the head, you don't have to zip tie them. She's caught in her own illogic. She can't get out of it. There's no possible way you can escape that box. That's a Gordian knot, and you can't cut that one. There's no way you can get out of that logic knot. And she's continuing to say, well, we don't know. You don't know. She's like, no, I'm presenting you the prima facie information. You either have one thing or you have the other thing. And neither of these things is good for you. Okay? You either handcuffed them and shot them, or you shot them and then handcuffed the dead bodies afterwards, which makes no sense, right? I think we know the answer. Just incredible. Absolutely stunning stuff. Great job, David Knight, for covering that. I do want to give you this real quick. Of all things, Amal Clooney, George Clooney's wife, was evidently, they say, among the legal experts who recommended arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu from the ICC. Just figured I'd bring that one up. It's, not necessarily anything gigantic. And I want to remind you again, the story, mass graves found at Gaza hospital, raided by Israel, prompt demands for independent investigation. And of course, that's from April 27th. That is back when this Nasser Medical Complex. And I love how she says, well, you just don't understand. There's all these tunnels. It's the tunnels, you see. Oh, okay. I get it. Sure thing. Yeah, absolutely. Now, with that being stated, let's take the opportunity to cover a couple other real quick items, but I want to turn to the Gray Zone's Max and Aaron Mate. Max and Aaron doing excellent work as they both, sorry, I just have to pause something, as they both discuss the ICC and its recommendations for war crimes for apprehension. And also, before I even do that, actually, I promise I mentioned there's some great comments inside Rockfin. So I want to scroll back up here. Excellent comments inside Rockfin from people. And the freaking goes, Clooney, barf. Yeah, well, I got to say, he did a really good job in a couple movies. I've enjoyed him. But even in Spy Kids 3, he did a killer Sylvester Stallone impression. It was pretty darn funny. And he seems like a funny guy and stuff like that. And I got to, hand it to his wife for trying to do that about Israel. So good job, being one of those people. I'm not going to go into super details on that. I think there's some more substantive stuff that I want to get to right now. And that is coming from Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate as they talk about how these accusations from the ICC are not necessarily to be taken super seriously because they missed a lot of people and they targeted a number of people who shouldn't have been targeted on the Hamas side. And they've got some interesting comments. And again, philosophically, Max Blumenthal is absolutely right when he talks about Hamas and its defense. The question is, well, we'll talk about the question in just a minute. Here we go.
In Galant, when it's well known, the names of commanders in the Israeli military who carried out specific war crimes, including the targeting of the Maghazi refugee camp in which over 200 people were killed. A 2,000-pound bomb was dropped on people for no reason. So many crimes like this. They're not indicted. It wouldn't be hard to target those commanders. And like we talked with the Nathaniel Raymond, the Yale researcher sponsored by the State Department, Jeremy Lafredo interviewed him on why they went after Putin over supposedly kidnapping Ukrainian children rather than something like Bucha, where we were told that there were all of these mass graves and massacres. And basically what Raymond told him was we, wouldn't be able to prove that a certain commander carried out orders to do that. And we wanted to get something that would also have PR value. And we wanted, therefore, Putin to be named as the main defendant, just simply for propaganda value. But also because they couldn't identify commanders and produce, signals intercepts to implicate specific Russian commanders. But with Israel, it's all there. And you also have soldiers boasting about war crimes on their own social media accounts. So that's one flaw in this indictment. The other flaw is, as Aaron pointed out, the indictment of Hamas. It shows that the ICC is politicized in that it does not recognize the right of a colonized people or non-state actors who are occupied, prevented from having a state, from engaging in armed resistance. This is the same mentality that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have adopted.
Okay, so I do want to bring up a couple points there. First, on the Russian story, I want to sort of amplify on that myself with what I know. And the charges that were brought up against Putin, specifically on that, the reason they didn't bring it up in that other area that Max was bringing up was because that would not have been provable. and it wouldn't have been provable because there was no real evidence for it. They chose the children thing because Vladimir Putin did remove those children so they could drum up a story about it, and the children were safe. And we talked about, Judge Napolitano was talking about this with Douglas McGregor. All the children were accounted for. They got them out of that war zone, and Putin did move to protect them. But it allowed the narrative to be supported because he did remove the kids, and then they could cut off the rest of the information about that, right? So they could continue with the ICC's going to charging him with war crimes because he supposedly kidnapped kids and so on and so forth, that sort of thing. Now, the other part that I want to bring up is something that Max, in conversation, it would be good to engage him with this. The occupied have an absolute right to fight against the occupied force. The question is, as an anarchist, I try to mention again, the question is, are the civilians culpable in the wrongdoing of the nation state, right? So, and this is where the terrorists that have come into the United States, very few have done so, but I give the great example almost every time of the Times Square bomber, because he also buys into the canard that it is a so-called representative government in the United States, that somehow the government is us, that the government of the United States controlling us and taking our money for what they want to do with the military industrial contractors lobbying and the Israeli lobbyists and all the different forces and their ideological cultural Marxist ideas and things like that, all those things that they're pushing, that somehow we buy into this thing, that somehow representation is mathematically possible, that this pie-in-the-sky idea of Rousseau's, that anything that happens in the assembly is the general will and represents the will of everybody here, somehow that applies. So we get to this question more specifically right now with, if you are a person who is living in a place that's occupied by a foreign nation state, and there are civilians who are enjoying life in that foreign nation state, is it okay to attack them too? Or are you engaging in something that's just as bad? Targets associated with the military who voluntarily join the military or the political forces of that occupying state, I think that there's clear moral arguments that can be said that you are in self-defense. The question is, how many of those civilians even agree with the policy? Can you assume that, say, a child of 15 years old who has never even voted but lives with his parents in Israel and is at this party or something like that, this concert, can you assume that he gives his consent or not? No, nobody in a nation state literally has been allowed to show real consent on the vast majority of things. I have never given my consent to the Constitution. The nation state is applied to us, right? So this is one of those very important moral areas that I think needs to be addressed, and I think it's best to address it from a voluntarist, anarchist standpoint. Now, coming up later in the program, we're going to be chatting about a big gun issue, and we're also going to go back into the Antony Blinken saga, as Antony Blinken was grilled. I should use the active voice, as Rand Paul grilled Antony Blinken on some very important matters having to do with economics. However, Rand Paul did not bring up something that Rand Paul, as a senator, should probably bring up, whether or not there's anything in the Constitution that allows for this stuff to happen in the first place. There's plenty more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Find us every Monday through Friday on Rockfin, Rumble, and Twitter, starting 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. With fees of less than a penny per transaction, Dash is made for spending. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol and in multi-crypto wallets. Thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month for this sponsorship. It's easy to get and use Dash. You can learn more at dash.org. That's dash.org.
Free Talk Live.
You guys are just penguins. You're lemmings.
I'm a penguin. I'm a lemming.
Walking off the. Do you know what a lemming is?
Yeah, well, it's a little rodent that people claim jump off of cliffs.
It's not a rodent. It's a penguin, and you just walk
a
off.
lemming is a
penguin? That's a new one.
They're penguin
Yeah, it is.
I'll check
it's
it
a
out.
Penguin, dude.
No, it's
and
not.
And you just walk
It's a little
off
rodent.
the cliff. You're rigged. It's rigged.
Hold on, Mark is correct. A lemming, according to Wikipedia, is a small rodent. It is found usually near the Arctic. Together with voles and muskrats, they make up the subfamily.
She was really just confused. It doesn't make a difference. So what? It's
They're related to rats, mice, hamsters, and gerbils.
But they do jump off
penguins.
But they do jump off cliffs, don't
No,
they?
they don't. They don't jump off cliffs. It's an analogy.
Oh my God! You didn't live. You guys are too young.
Beverly, you turned my world upside down. Lemmings don't jump off cliffs?
Man,
they do in the video game.
Free Talk Live. 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern at freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. The ruling comes as the United Nations top court continues its probe into whether Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Israel strongly denies the charges and the case brought by South Africa. William Denzelo reports from The Hague, where the ICJ is based.
It was an overwhelming ruling from the 15-member panel of the ICJ, 13-2, ordering Israel to cease its military operation in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. The ICJ has ordered Israel to, within a month, check back in to ensure they're complying with this order, also to allow unhindered access when it comes to UN investigators into Gaza going forward as well. Israel has long maintained that it is complying with international humanitarian law, and it's doing what it can to protect civilian life. But the message from the ICJ is overwhelming, that they say that Israel needs to do more on that front.
This comes as the United Nations resumes transporting humanitarian aid arriving at a US-built pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip. Deliveries were halted earlier this week for security reasons, while some aid was intercepted by Palestinians. In other news, Friday marks 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, where a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers in their classrooms in the US state of Texas. Earlier this week, the families sued Texas state troopers for their delayed response to what is the worst school shooting in the state's history. Tony Waterman has more.
The families say the pain has been worsened by the lack of accountability over law enforcement's botched response. Officers waited 77 minutes to confront the gunman. A private investigator for the city of Uvalde cleared all local officers of wrongdoing earlier this year, and families are now anxiously awaiting the outcome of a grand jury investigation to see if any of the nearly 400 officers who responded will be criminally charged.
And fake accounts posting about the US presidential election are spreading across X, formerly known as Twitter, according to new research. A study, first published by Reuters news agency, monitoring posts on the social media platform, found a high proportion of accounts praising former President Donald Trump and criticizing President Joe Biden are not real. This comes as both presidential candidates ramp up their campaign efforts, with less than 6 months to go until Americans head to the polls. From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
We're still not sure why you'd want to watch, but our video feed is streaming nightly for free at cam.freetalklive.com. Free Talk Live.
Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, join us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rockfin, Rumble, my X/Twitter at Gard Goldsmith, and now on YouTube. And you can also head over to my Substack, the Gardner Goldsmith Substack, and you'll find the Sunday News Assembly there every Sunday with lots of big stories about individual liberty. Thanks, everyone. Yes, everybody, it is time for the Mind Meld with our guest, Courtney Turner. Go to CourtneyTurner.com to find out everything that she does. Check her out on her Rumble page. She is awesome. I'm going to show you one of the latest videos that I actually watched for the second time from November 2022. One of the great interviews she got to do with Patrick Wood, of course, of Technocracy. Technocracy.news, I believe, is the site. Courtney Turner is with us, and we've got three of us, two of you and one of me on the screen. Hey, Courtney, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I actually just did another episode with Patrick Wood that will be airing probably either next week or the week after. But
serious? It's really?
Just yesterday. We just recorded it. Yeah.
You're such a great team because, of course, his work on uncovering technocracy really does so much. And there are so many things I want to ask you about. First, this Christ consciousness thing, also the Tavistock Institute. And I want to just mention, depending upon how much time you have available, I want to get some questions from the audience if people have some questions for you. But I want to mention again, they can go to CourtneyTurner.com. And if you're listening in audio, it's CourtneyAy Turner, TURNER.com. And you can follow her under the same thing on X, Courtney Turner on X. You've got your Rumble channel as well. And you've got an easy way to contact you at your website if people want to contact you. You've got lots of speaking events and events that you're putting together. We want to talk about that as well. So, Courtney, thank you very much. I love the color scheme. It's just it's awesome. And by the way, you posted a video a little while ago of you going up that rope just with your arms, just upper body strength. That was the best. That was the best. Oh, and I remember in school when we used to have the rope and would go up to the top of the rafters of the basketball court. And when you hit the metal, you had so much static, you'd get shocked. And it was like, you didn't want to touch, and you could hear it snap. Yeah, you could hear it snap when people hit it. So, Courtney, welcome to the program. And I had so many compliments when you were on last time. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah, I had so much fun. So
yeah,
I'm glad to be back.
It was awesome. Let me ask you, what are you working on right now? And then I'd love to pick your brain on a couple of these items. You got that Patrick Wood interview coming up about technocracy and more. But I'm interested because a lot of these things really weave together, whether it's technocracy and Tavistock. I've got some thoughts about that. Operant behavior, social engineering, mixing with technocracy, a lot of these things, Fabian socialism leading into those. Yeah. What are you working on right now? And then, you've got the Patrick Wood thing coming up. And then let's get into something that you might want to pick, either Christ consciousness or Tavistock, or if there's something else you want to hit that might be really important for you.
Okay. Well, right now, so I've been doing shows nonstop. I think we did 16 last week. I think 11 or 12 this week, because it looks like we are going to Geneva next week.
Wow.
So I am doing a fundraiser, and I'm not typically a shameless plug kind of person, but this trip is so incredibly expensive that any support I can get, I greatly appreciate. And even a little bit, if a lot of people chip in a little bit, it goes a long way. So what it is that that the WHO which is part of the UN, is working on their scamdemic agreements. They've changed it from treaty to an agreement, so that it doesn't have to be ratified, right? They're very clever how they get around these things, right? So they're working on that at the end of this month. And so there is the Inspired Global Leadership Summit, which has invited me to be a part of. It's essentially kind of, they're still developing it. This is their second year, but I did a show on it. This is kind of it sounds kind of like a think tank, essentially. They're trying to put together parallel systems so that we have, a bridge to exit the WHO and, ways that we can do that. And what that's going to look like, especially coming together, worldwide. Because we've got people all over the world who are coming to this. And obviously, we don't all have the same culture, the same medical system, the same issues or infrastructure, or the same needs. But we are going to be coming together to have these discussions about ways that we can, approach this, but retain personal and national sovereignty and medical freedom. And they've invited me. I'm incredibly honored. It's a really phenomenal group of people. So, just to be on a list with them is really an honor. But it is the 31st and the 1st. The 1st is going to be a rally, and that's open to anybody who, has the means, the time, and the proclivity, the desire to go to Geneva. They can be a part of this rally. And they can do it, from home too. I encourage people to do that as well if they want to just do some sort of a march, just showing their solidarity. That word seems to have been tainted these days, but for the movement for freedom to step out of the WHO.
I love this.
That's going to be on the 1st, but then on the 31st, it's this summit, which is a group of us. And so I have been invited to go. I am really at this point kind of committed to going, but I'm taking a big leap. I've raised a little bit, but I think I've raised about an eighth of the cost. So,
all right.
So I have on my website, you can see that's the most recent episode I did. Was with the ladies who are putting this together, which is just incredible. So ambitious and inspiring. Lives up to the name, Inspired Global Leadership Summit. And then you see right there on the bottom right, you'll see that little ad, Stop the WHO. And that is a Give, Send, Go that I put together. So people can go there and contribute if they want to support my journey, since the flights alone are just like astronomical.
Let's see if we can get this pumped up by another $100 or something, tonight. Maybe people will see this after the fact, that would be great, Courtney. I love this. Yeah.
And if people want to do a Venmo too, because I know some people have asked that, Venmo is at Courtney Turner. Again, I spelled my name. It's Courtney, COURTENAY Turner at Venmo, is because some people have preferred that option.
Okay. Too. All right. That sounds great. And this description, this is really, really important because they are doing total verbal sleight of hand and temporal sleight of hand. They keep doing these delays, these sorts of things. And last night I was covering the One Health aspect of this.
Oh, yeah. That's part of the WHO.
Yeah, absolutely. Once they slide in the One Health thing, the WHO pandemic agreement, the WHO pandemic new rules that they're going to come up with, they carve out slots for the One Health thing to do its thing, and it can operate on its own without anything. They have this. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of their offshoots where they can load in the new terminology, and this WHO so-called pandemic agreement can say, well, we defer to them. And they're the ones who come up with all these things about food, vaccination for food, regulations on all that stuff. So it's amazing the way it's a shell game, and they keep adding new shells, paying off more people to be the bureaucrats inside those shells, and they keep building it and building it and building it. And thank God bless you for doing this, Courtney. It's just excellent. Geneva, Switzerland, and also for coming here. I know as the calendar starts to approach, we're getting close to June. You must be, really getting, full bear, doing a lot of stuff. So thank you for having that energy. It's excellent.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's right now, that's what I'm focused on. Just trying to put all that together, get the funds in order, and get just, the logistics together. And I've been front loading so many shows because we're going to be gone most of June as well. I'm going to the Red Pill Expo. I'm going to be doing a booth with Dr. Lee Merritt. We have a show together called The Dangerous Dame. So we're working on getting some merch together for that. And then I'll also be at the Reawaken tour. So I'm not speaking this time, but I'm doing media there. I have spoken at it before. So
Courtney, you're awesome. You're awesome. And I know you don't have any green there, but I'm green with envy. That's all I'm going to say. You got the purple, you got the pink. I want to mention, we've got Pork Fest up here, and I hope sometime either for Pork Fest or the Liberty Forum, which is the wintertime gathering, the Free State Project. Yeah. If you ever get the chance to come up, it's just awesome. Richard Grove was up here last year.
I was going to say,
Yeah, he was great.
I've co-hosted his show before. Yeah.
And awesome people we all have mutual friends, and I've been so sick recently that it's only through electronic communications with my friends that about a month ago I got to see Glenn Jacobs again, and I saw Jason Sorens and Carla from the Free State Project and Mark Edge from Free Talk Live and stuff. And I hadn't seen those guys. I saw Andrew. That was awesome. I saw my friend Ian Freeman's wife. Ian, of course, is now in federal prison because he was offering people crypto exchanges, and they got after him and his wife now. They'd only been married a little while. So all these groups, these good people working, and I hope we can get people to contribute. Again, if they get the chance, they can go over to your site, click on it at Courtney Turner, CourtneyTurner.com, and they can follow you again on X, and we'll show it again to contribute to your trip to Geneva. That's awesome. I wish I could be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you, Courtney. You know, I was thinking about some of the topics we can discuss, and you've been covering so many things. And if people follow your Twitter feed, they'll probably have noticed a couple things. And I don't know which one you want to start with, whether it's Christ consciousness or it's Tavistock. But I wrote something down. I said on Tavistock, because of course, you know, I've got Estelin's book on Tavistock, and I've been aware of the Tavistock thing of, for example, Paul Joseph Watson and his brother actually covered, there was that one bus in the King's Cross bombing from like 2007 or there you go. I was going to pull mine out too.
The Estelin and Coleman. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I've got the big stack over here, and I was going to pull it out, but I'm like, no, it's like book Jenga. If I pull one out, they're all going to fall over, you know?
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah. And it's great too, because for me, and I don't know how it was for you, but my mom was really clued into this stuff, you know, very, very early on. And
my mom has a PhD in psychology. My sister has a master's in mental health. So I wrote 285-page theses in high school on dream analysis. My school actually published it. My high school.
Oh yeah, that's right. You found out later that it was published or something, right? You didn't know at the time or something like that, right?
Yeah, I didn't know. They apparently published it as like promotional material for the school. Like as a kind of like a coup, like look what kind of stuff we do here. Yeah.
Nice.
There was another paper I had written my sophomore year of high school. It was on the trial of Socrates. It was for English class. My English teacher gave us like once a month, we could do essentially book reports, which is kind of a luxury. I mean, in high school, you know, to do book reports. And so once a month we could do that. And for one of the months, and I would do just weird things. Like 1 month I wrote like a book report. I mean, it wasn't really a book report, but it was an analysis of like, I would analyze songs as poems. So I analyzed Billy Joel's The Stranger, that song.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did like a really long paper analyzing the song. But I wrote one month, it was on the trial of Socrates. And that book just had such a profound impact on me. And I didn't find out, this might be what you're thinking of. I didn't find out until my senior year of high school that my freshman year history teacher actually published it.
I love that. That's just such a neat thing, you know. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I really thought was kind of neat was I had a history teacher in high school named Rick Hanchett. He was awesome. He would come in the door doing the Ministry of Silly Walks for Monty Python. He was the best. He was the funniest dude. He was so witty. He was into all these interesting things that I was into, you know, and he used to carry walking sticks. And if people were like sloughing off, he would just smash the stick down on their desk. It was awesome. And he would have these things that he would call learning experiences, which were the surprise quiz. And he'd say, oh, we're going to have a learning experience. You're going to learn how much you know or don't know right now.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and I always did, in fact, for American history, my sister was 5 years ahead of me. I had her notes from his class. And in study hall before that class, I would study her notes. Like I really immersed myself. Yeah. It was like a competition for me to do a really good job. Because I really loved this teacher. Yeah, he was great. So I found out another friend of mine, who was a year behind me in school, Mike, he became a teacher, history teacher. And he is related through marriage to Mr. Hanchett now. Like his cousin is married to Rick Hanchett. And so I saw Mike a while back, and I said, boy, you know, how's Rick doing? And, you know, I always admired him. Rick ended up going to Yale for law school, and he got the highest you could get, like a record on the LSATs. Like nobody had ever gotten that high for the LSATs.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so he did real well. And he became an attorney in Florida. He's a good guy. And I always detected very strong pro-liberty, libertarian ideas from this man. I took a European history class from him, learned about Cicero, you know, crossing the Rubicon and all these different types of things. Learned about John Locke, who read the second treatise, understood the context of the first and second treatises and all those things, right? Just excellent. So Mike said, oh, yeah, he's doing well. You know, he watches your videos on MRC TV. He's gotten to see some. He likes them. And I just was thrilled.
That's awesome.
I know. I was like, oh,
cool. Yeah.
That's
super cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I remember one other thing that I'll mention to you is on one of the homecomings when I came back my freshman year from college, he was still teaching there, and they have the homecoming basketball game and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I was going to see him there because they have the guys. Then the next night they have the girls. So he was going to be there for the girls game as well because he was the coach of the girls team actually.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he was the coach of the girls JV team. So when I knew I was going to see him, so I made a cassette of all sorts of goofy stuff. And I knew he used to love Fawlty Towers. So I had Fawlty Towers on audio. And back then, like it wasn't even on VHS. There was no way you could get it. So I had a couple on audio and I put them on this cassette and I added one of the fake commercials for Spinal Tap that was on the end of the Spinal Tap VHS for Heavy Metal Memories. It was this goofy fake record that you could get with Christmas with the Devil and all these other goofy things. And I had that on there. A while later, I saw him again. He goes, "Hey, Goldsmith." I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, that cassette, that Fawlty Tower stuff was great." He says, "He had a bunch of other weird stuff on there too." He goes, "That Spinal Tap thing." He goes, "I got to tell you, I hadn't seen Spinal Tap, but because of that, I got it." He goes, "One of my favorites now." I'm like, "Yeah, cool." So I got to introduce him to the tap. That was good, Hey, so let's hop into the chat before we get into some of the questions that I have for you on some of these things. I'm going to dip into your brain here, okay?
Okay.
And it's they're good waters, I think. So if anybody has any questions for Courtney, post them in X, in Rumble, or Rockfin. I'll try to check in on YouTube as well. And I'm seeing my skinny arms doing that again now because there's a delay. And luckily, I'm still doing my pull-ups and stuff. Steve Swan,
awesome.
he says, "Oh, this is interesting." So Steve has something that sort of pertains to some of the news that we had. Okay. And Steve, I saw your Substack, actually. I got to see it. Thank you for posting that. He says, "I wrote a short article today. The mass coverage of Gaza and the college protests is a pretext to the globalist usurpation of more of our rights via anti-Semitism." And he put a link into the chat if you want to find that over at Rumble. Thanks, Steve, for doing that. I think you're up in Maine, right? Freegan is up in Canada, in Toronto. And he says, "The war/slaughter, the mass media, and the college protests all brought to us by our greatest ally, the most moral army on earth." Oh, boy, isn't that true? And we could go into some of the funky esoteric and occultist connections to the foundations of Israel sometime at a future date, right, Courtney?
Yeah, I would love to.
I would love to as well, because, and the interesting thing, Courtney, is to somebody at the, maybe the superficial level, they might think, "Oh, no, you're just doing that because you don't look. My last name sounds Jewish. I'm English and Irish. Like I said, when I was at Boston University, it's 90% Jewish. They thought I was a Zionist Jew. So I would hear things that they would say about the Palestinians that I just couldn't even believe that other human beings would say. Oh, it was stunning. They just thought of them like animals. It was, I'm telling you, it was utterly bizarre. It was bizarre. It was this sociopathic, blinders on, total offense, no consideration for ethics or morals whatsoever. I mean, absolutely sociopathic.
Wow.
We're talking like the mind of mass murderer in some of these people. I just couldn't understand it. It was bizarre. And it was all predicated on the never again thing. That was their out. Never again. Oh, so it was just bizarre. Yeah. So sometime we can go into that.
I think so much. We'll go into that, but I mean, it's a dialectic. Both sides have been very much played, and there's so much brainwashing. The propaganda is so thick. And when you talk about the never again, I mean, most of that narrative was propagated by the Frankfurt School. They've intentionally created an identity attachment to the Holocaust, which is really very insulting. I mean, that is not the entirety of a Jewish identity.
Yeah, can you imagine hijacking that way?
Yeah, they really did hijack it, and they've admitted to it. Michael Mendicino has done some really great work on this. So he's a good one he's done some really great speeches and articles talking about this. But if you just read the Frankfurt School work, you'll the philosophers themselves, they talk about this, and it's very similar to what they've done to the blacks with making their whole identity about slavery, which again is very insulting. I mean, there are many who have no ancestry of slavery at all. That should not be their identity. but that's what they've done. They've attached identities to these specific groups so that they can become victims, create victimhood, and it's a whole narrative of victimhood, and then they can pit them against each other. But with the Gaza Israel situation, that's actually way more intricate, because it is a dialectic, and it's you can't expect the people who have promised the same land to two opposing groups, and it's the same people. It's the UN and the British intelligence who have who have promised this land to opposing groups of people, and you expect that it's going to be a simple kind of easy scenario. Like, obviously you're going to create tension. It was a dialectical pole created for the intention of being a dialectical pole.
Oh, it's incredible the way they sucker people in, the greed and the self-righteousness of some people. Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, one of the things that this dialectic utilizes is sort of a parallel track of the protective cover that can be used with the never again or the racist stuff. And also, as you say, the ability to split people off and get them to buy into this as their identity, and they get very righteous about it. So it does serve two purposes. It protects the people from, say, the Frankfurt School, who are going over, how dare you criticize us? We're mainly Jewish, and so on and so forth. And then you get well, how dare you criticize anybody who's with us, who is part of this group, this group, that. So you can see how, by seeing how well it works for them, they can then try to generate this for other groups and play people off each other.
Yeah. So, and I mean, with the Frankfurt School, it wasn't actually so much about them being Jewish. It was more about them creating identity politics. There's that's really what was going on at that time. You look at, you're familiar with Hegel and like his whole dialectical pole, right? So part of what Hegel actually said, people often think thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That was actually Fichte's interpretation of Kant's dialectic, right? So what Hegel actually said was that it was the abstract, negative, concrete. And the negative in German is this word Aufheben. Aufheben is this very oxymoronic term, which means to lift up and preserve while simultaneously canceling and tearing down. And it, really translates to like sublation, but it's even more intricate than that. It's this very paradoxical framework, and it does create a synthesis, but the synthesis is synthetic in the sense they call it concretization. And I bring it up because what did the Frankfurt School create? They created Aufheben de Culture. And this is the cancel culture, right? Yes. And part of how they did this is through this infiltration. They took the Antonio Gramsci's notion of infiltrating the 5 pillars of society in order to propagate the belief systems that they were trying to espouse, and then to create the demoralization, to create the chaos. And so the identity politics is a way of wrapping things into a very nice umbrella so that you can basically attack anything. It's critique, right? That's a critical theory. So whether it becomes critical race theory, critical legal theory, all of these fall under this umbrella. But the intersectionality is really what they were creating by finding these groups to carve out narratives of victimhood. So.
Yes, and this is absolutely right. To also identify critical theory coming out of that is so important, and it's interesting too, Courtney, because we've seen, or history has seen, different people attempt sort of facets of that with Rousseau when he wrote his Discourse on Inequality, but the first and the second discourse, and criticized private property and things like that, the way Marx was able to, and of course with a lot of support from very special, well-heeled friends who knew that these guys, they could play these guys off, get the commoners to sort of buy into this. Stay tuned for more Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
Hi, I'm Derek J. To me, an activist's calling is to actively work to advance a cause. The cause for which I work is personal freedom. I believe my life is best when I engage in voluntary interactions and self-government. I reject the idea that anyone else has a higher claim to my life or my body than I do. I see people who call themselves the government as a threat to my personal freedom. I realize you may feel differently, but my relationship with the people who call themselves the government is completely involuntary. If Starbucks used some of its money to drop bombs, I wouldn't shop there. So why would I support the American empire? The empire does not require my consent.
Derek J's Victimless Crime Spree. Watch it for free and order the Director's Cut DVD at victimlesscrimespree.com. That's victimlesscrimespree.com. The new 4th edition of Healing Our World, The Compassion of Libertarianism, will take your understanding of liberty to a deeper level and has over 1,300 updated references, new cartoons, and a foreword by Dr. Ron Paul. With discounts for multiple book purchases, the 4th edition of Healing Our World is a great gift for the liberals, pragmatists, environmentalists, and Christians in your life who think libertarianism is cold-hearted. Get yours today at healing.freetalklive.com and use promo code FTL for a $5 discount. There are lots of ways to listen to Free Talk Live. Our podcast has been around since podcasts began, and now the FTL feed is loaded with content besides our full show archives. Did you know that we make it easy for you to customize your podcast subscriptions? We have different feeds, one that includes only our full shows, one with just the Daily Digest, and our main feed that includes everything. You decide what you listen to. It's quick and easy to customize your feeds at feeds.freetalklive.com. That's feeds.freetalklive.com.
The latest episode of Free Talk Live continues with Hour 3 up next after the news here at listen.freetalklive.com.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. The ruling comes as the United Nations top court continues its probe into whether Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Israel strongly denies the charges and the case brought by South Africa. William Denzelo reports from The Hague, where the ICJ is based.
It was an overwhelming ruling from the 15-member panel of the ICJ, 13-2, ordering Israel to cease its military operation in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. The ICJ has ordered Israel to, within a month, check back in to ensure they're complying with this order, also to allow unhindered access when it comes to UN investigators into Gaza going forward as well. Israel has long maintained that it is complying with international humanitarian law, and it's doing what it can to protect civilian life. But the message from the ICJ is overwhelming, that they say that Israel needs to do more on that front.
This comes as the United Nations resumes transporting humanitarian aid arriving at a US-built pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip. Deliveries were halted earlier this week for security reasons, while some aid was intercepted by Palestinians. In other news, Friday marks 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, where a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers in their classrooms in the US state of Texas. Earlier this week, the families sued Texas state troopers for their delayed response to what is the worst school shooting in the state's history. Tony Waterman has more.
The families say the pain has been worsened by the lack of accountability over law enforcement's botched response. Officers waited 77 minutes to confront the gunman. A private investigator for the city of Uvalde cleared all local officers of wrongdoing earlier this year, and families are now anxiously awaiting the outcome of a grand jury investigation to see if any of the nearly 400 officers who responded will be criminally charged. Tony Waterman, Texas.
And fake accounts posting about the US presidential election are spreading across X, formerly known as Twitter, according to new research. A study first published by Reuters news agency monitoring posts on the social media platform found a high proportion of accounts praising former President Donald Trump and criticizing President Joe Biden are not real. This comes as both presidential candidates ramp up their campaign efforts, with less than 6 months to go until Americans head to the polls.
I love it, Donald Trump. It's my favorite presidente. I love him.
Trump's presidential campaign is turning its focus to African American and Hispanic communities. At least 1,000 people attended the former president's rally in the Bronx in New York City on Thursday. Mitch McCann reports.
Donald Trump's venue for Thursday's rally was an unusual location for a Republican. No GOP candidate has won New York since Ronald Reagan back in 1984. But in the Bronx, Trump focused on New York life, promising to make the city affordable again and to clean up the subway system. Trump says he will do that so it no longer looks like it hasn't been cleaned since 1932. The former president also focused on African American and Hispanic voters. Trump blamed President Joe Biden for problems facing those communities. African Americans are getting slaughtered. Hispanic Americans are getting slaughtered, he said. Ahead of November's election, Trump says those communities can rely on him to improve their lives. Mitch McCann, New York.
And the French president says riot-hit New Caledonia will not become the Far West. Emmanuel Macron was speaking after a visit to the French overseas territory, which has been hit by more than 10 days of deadly unrest. On Friday, another death was confirmed after a man was shot by police, bringing the total number of fatalities to 7. To recap the top stories, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. Memorial events are taking place in the U.S. state of Texas to mark 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, which left 19 children and 2 teachers dead. And new research shows fake accounts posting about the U.S. presidential election are spreading across social media platform X. That's the latest feature story news. Sally Patterson reporting.
I'm getting joined by Ellie Granderson. She's going to put a feminine scope on these lace kerchief starbuggers and give us her lady opinion. Ellie?
Hi, Joe.
You know, it riles me up every time you walk in here, Ellie. You set my blood to dancing with all your pillowy parts.
Oh, stop it, Joe.
Now give it to me, no fimble famble, Ellie. When we start dusting these rocket boys' lily white bottoms with baby puff?
Joe, since the end of the Cold War, NASA has basically functioned as a giveaway to the American aerospace industry, wasting trillions of taxpayer dollars every year on extravagant programs with no tangible benefit.
Finds a plum to look at, all the sense of a badger to boot.
Joe.
Now I've been thinking on, I got these 3 little chickens pecking on my head while save NASA some coin. Man wants to go to space, can strap on the helmet, climb in the cannon, let the Chinese gunpowder carry him off among the stars. He'll come back now. Gonna skin a fox in one throat, and you're gonna fancy on it.
This is the Onion News Network.
You can help spread the ideas of liberty with our Patreon for just $5 per month at amps.freetalklive.com.
Free Talk Live.
Welcome back to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Watch us Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, and my X at Guard Goldsmith. As you're coming towards the end of the end of the royal peerage system, you can get this hatred of the feudal system and then reapply it to business owners, property owners, anything like that. Come up with a new dialectic that you can then perpetuate any way you want with race or class or whatever it might be. So let me ask you this. I wrote this down about Tavistock.
Yeah.
And I said, I see Tavistock as one of the key nodes where Fabian socialists meet Gnosticism, meet Hermeticism, meet Darwinism and Darwinist theory, and, you know, very tied together with a lot of these things, occult theories, meets Hegelian dialectical materialism, meets social engineering, and it's all leveraged to use with power through applied psychology and social engineering to develop the technocracy. Do you think that is a valid approach?
Yeah, you got a lot of them in there, but yeah, I absolutely agree. That's absolutely true.
Would you like to? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think they actually created the field of psychology in order to have a means to study the human behaviors and figure out where the breaking points are so that they could mold, shape, and socially engineer and figure out the breaking points so that they could create trauma-based mind control.
Yeah, and I don't know what you think about this, but in my experience, especially with social psychologists, is they have created a pseudoscience that trusts the science, gets a lot of government support, a lot of support through the ivory tower, and is unquestionable when it's not really a science. It's their ability to use the label science to then be able to convince people that this is the right way to go, this is the right way to treat children, this is the right way for the state to now get involved in managing people's lives, coming up with terms, and further creating more instances where they can split people off and say, this person is a good person, this person is a bad person, opposed to the underling, so therefore we have to bring that person down. And I think a lot of this has to do with envy. A lot of it has to do with a lack of Christian virtues and a replacement. That's why I want to get to that Christian...
Well, it's not just lack of Christian virtues, it's actually an opposition to Christian virtues.
Well, yeah, well stated. Thank you for the correction.
Sorry.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So which would you want to approach? Would you want to talk about Tavistock a little bit, the background of Tavistock, coming from Sussex and the Tavistock Institute, where it actually started off at Wellington House and that sort of thing? Or do you want to start off with Tavistock and how it sort of ties into the Christ consciousness thing?
It's
sort of
all tied together. So I don't know which one you would want to start with first. So there's, obviously the theosophical roots, and I absolutely think, they're very much interconnected. It's really the same people. Unfortunately, when you do this research, when people, I really started saying, when people say like, there's no way that like there could be this big giant conspiracy, like, dude, you can't have all these people connected. Like this master plan just couldn't work that way. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's not, a seamless kind of interconnected. But when you start diving into this research, whatever angle you take, whether you start looking into the medical history, things like the WHO, wait, it's connected to the UN. Wait, the Rockefellers literally donated the land for the UN. They created the UN. All the roots of theosophy. Oh, wait, the Rockefellers don't. Well, the same thing with Tavistock. Like it's the same people, and it's not just the Rockefellers. Oh wait, it's like the Carnegies, it's the Crown, it's the Ashtons, it's the same people who were involved in the central banks. It's like it doesn't matter which pillar you start investigating. These institutions and these businesses, these NGOs, they all seem to be interconnected. It's crazy,
right? And they're very interested in psychological control over people, conditional behavioral training, of course the psychosocial controls, political controls, banking controls, pharmaceutical controls, educational controls. They're all and eugenics, big time towards the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, big time with eugenics. So the Tavistock Institute, you mentioned theosophy. So let's start with theosophy if we can, and just talk how that sort of developed with Madame Blavatsky
and so on. Theosophy. I just did a video that I aired today, and this is on World Invocation Day. Is coming up tomorrow, World Invocation Day. So they are literally summoning what they call Master Christ. And so this is very misleading, can be a little deceptive for people who are Christian. This sounds like, oh, they're Christian, right? But people like Oprah have been talking about Christ consciousness for decades. Now you're seeing a lot of big influencers and people in the media, people like Candace Owens, people like Russell Brand. They're talking about Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness comes straight out of Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner. These are theosophists. Yes, Rudolf Steiner branched off, and he started the aristocracy. I can never pronounce it. But his version, which is, it's still just another flavor of a cult. I keep saying it's like if you've got chocolate, strawberry, vanilla, they're all still ice cream flavors. And,
right.
They have nuanced differences, but they're still subscribing. They're under the umbrella of theosophy. And, this is this idea that Christ he's within every one of us. And again, that can be a little bit misleading. And, it's not for me to tell people what to believe, what worldview to subscribe to. I believe in freedom of consciousness. That's actually why I'm talking about these things because they want to erode our freedom of consciousness. I even say, like the Luciferians, they're welcome to believe what they believe and do as they do. I prefer they do it away from me, but they're entitled to their freedom of consciousness. And that's something that I hold very dear. These people want to erode freedom of consciousness. So I just want people, especially Christians, to understand when they're being deceived, because, if they're strong in their faith, then read your Bible and you will see this is very different than what they're talking about. They're talking about Christ being in each of us. And that's a very Gnostic principle that we are God. We have God in us. We are not God. At least that's not my belief. Right. There is a difference between those two. They are talking about Christ not as Jesus Christ, who, the Bible says died for your sins. They're talking about Master Christ, who is a world teacher. This is like an ascended master, no different than Krishna or Buddha. And they say this. I have so many quotes, and I won't bore you with all of them, but I could read a bunch of quotes from these people, from Blavatsky, from Creme, I think that's how you pronounce his name, from Alice Bailey, from Steiner, from all of these theosophists, from Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she's pretty creepy. I got a lot of information on her, and she's relevant right now, with
Could you repeat her name? You just broke up there a little bit. Who?
Sure. Barbara Marx Hubbard. So Marx should be easy for everyone to remember, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Barbara Marx Hubbard. She started the Center for Integral Wisdom, the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, which the Rockefellers funded. She's doing the heart math technology, which is this biofeedback type technology to lull us into what do they call it? Global coherence. That's what it's called.
Yes.
Yes. So
it's just warmed over Age of Aquarius stuff. And that's one of the things, like you mentioned Russell Brand. And I am pleased that he's gotten out of that pretty much, which is good. He got baptized in the Catholic churches. I have some problems with the Catholic Church, obviously.
I'm very concerned because I wish the best, and I hope this is all genuine and authentic, but he's parroting a lot of things that are very theosophical. He's talking.
Well, that's it. He has done that for a long time, and you notice that recently there have been a lot of people who've been saying, I'm discovering Christ, I'm reading the Bible, and so on and so forth. So there is this sort of, the proof is in the pudding. But so far so good as far as that goes. And I think it's interesting also, Courtney, because when you look at people like Madame Blavatsky, very influential in the occult movement that then gave birth to. What's his name? Algernon. What's his name? The dude who's so loved by the Zeppelin. Aleister Crowley. Yeah. Aleister
who
Crowley.
Was British intelligence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And she was sponsored by a lot of people who were. It was basically a British intelligence, central government, international organization, Rockefeller, Rothschild's move in conjunction with the British government to promote people like Madame Blavatsky, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875. Blavatsky is certainly one of the most well-known founders, but there were, I think, actually 19 founders. One of the other very well-known ones is Henry Alcott, and he was actually British intelligence. So he had direct connections there. And then, there were a lot of Fabians who were involved in the Theosophical Society. Of course, Annie Besant, who was one of the also original Theosophists, and she was a Fabian. It's also interesting that Annie Besant, Alice Bailey, who is a disciple of Madame Blavatsky, who started the Lucis Trust. It was originally Lucifer Publishing in 1922. They changed the name in 1923. I guess it was a little too on the nose. People weren't too thrilled with that name. But it was Lucifer Publishing, and it is now Lucis Trust. She started that, and then Madame Blavatsky, and all three of them, interestingly enough, were also Freemasons, which is very unusual since women typically aren't. They're usually members of the Order of the Eastern Star. But they were all three Freemasons. They were called co-Freemasons. And Alice Bailey, actually, who started the Lucis Trust and who was very influential on a lot of these people, also like one of them might be Robert Mueller, who created he worked for the UN for 38 years. He created what is called World Core Curriculum, although some in the U.S., it's better known as Common Core, or as Charlotte Iserbyt calls it, Communist Core, which I think is more aptly put. But he created World Core curriculum, and he said that most of his missions were based on the works of Alice Bailey. And Alice Bailey, it's interesting, Madame Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, a lot of them grew up being Orthodox Christian. And Alice Bailey had an ascended master who came to her. I think she was 10 years old, but I might not have the age right. It was when she was a little girl, and she was in church with her family. And this ascended master came to her and told her she could accomplish so much in life if she wasn't, constrained by this very rigid cultural and religious framework. I'm paraphrasing, but that, if she could break free, she could do so much. And her ascended master, Djwhal Khul, who helped her write 24 books and works, told her that her mission in life, and she later married Foster Bailey, who was a Mason as well, and told her that her mission in life was going to be to execute the mission of the Masons, which was to create a one world religion.
Of course.
And when you look at Lucis Trust, it looks like that's what they're doing.
That's exactly it.
This World Invocation Day is, it looks pretty creepy to me, but it's tomorrow, and they started it in 1945. And it was that was when Master Christ, and again, this is not Jesus Christ. They make it very clear when you really read their works. It's the words sound just deceptive. It sounds Christian, but when you really read them, and I could read quotes if you want me to, because they make it clear. They say like, this is satanic. We worship Lucifer. They're not talking about Jesus Christ. They're talking about Master Christ, the world. Possibly the Antichrist, in my opinion. That's what it looks like.
And
but
I don't know about you, Courtney, but I think that, removing the recognition of Christ, first of all, it's self-defeating, because if they say that Christ was a wise man and spoke the truth, then they have to agree that Christ said, I am the way, right? I am the only way. You're not going to fudge it and come around and call me Christ consciousness or anything. I am the root. That's it. You can connect to me. That's why I'm dying for you. That's the point. And it is quite interesting because I think so many people, maybe they've had rough times with how they were brought up in a church, or they were rebellious as teenagers. And so they want to find some alternate route. This is not the way. This is not the way. And these people appeal to this so strongly. I was thinking about, the Theosophy movement and how so many people back in the late 1800s, early 1900s got caught up in the seance movements. Even people like Arthur Conan Doyle got interested in that sort of thing, and there's always this question, as I think you and I might have spoken about this, as to popular figures at that time, whether it was H.G. Wells or other people who were brought up. And how many of those were authentically selling the way that they normally would in a regular marketplace, and how many of them were sort of promoted because of course they are promoting the one world theosophical evolutionary line,
which is what it really is all about. It's creating this umbrella because because under the guise of being tolerant and accepting and inclusive, although they very explicitly say they include all religions, but it's diametrically opposed to Christianity.
Isn't that a sad thing? Because they play on people's kind hearts. They play on people's vulnerabilities. And it's the same thing with Marxism, all these things. We're doing it for you, the little person. This is how you can be brought up and risen up. And of course, I think very clearly, if you look at the eugenics movement that is parallel to this and interwoven with this, it is a depopulation movement. It's a one world control movement. And it is, you mentioned how some people just can't believe, how can they do this generation upon generation? Well, the whole point of the Fabian socialist movement, like Fabius from ancient classical times, was to do it very slowly. The tortoise, do it slowly.
Incrementalism.
And they have a generational philosophy, which is that even if they can't achieve it in their lifetimes, as many of us might think, well, maybe I can pass on this information about freedom and Christianity to another person and it'll be better for that person. They're doing it the same way, except they're dark building blocks going down into the abyss, and they're bringing people down with it. They're building this reverse Tower of Babel in a way towards hell, I think, very clearly.
Yeah, I would agree. So, and it's, I think the thing that concerns me is just the deception. It's like you hear these terms and it sounds great. They talk about love and light and, acceptance and inclusion, and these things sound great. But when you really look at it, it really looks Luciferian. I mean, that's just, I don't know how else to paint it. And that's coming from somebody who doesn't, I'm not like a biblical scholar. I'm not immersed in that world, but there's just really no other way to read this. And when you read their quotes, I mean, they flat out say that, when you look at, so you go on to, and for anybody who wants a deeper dive on this, I've done so many shows on Theosophy, and the one I just aired today goes into the history of World Invocation Day, which did start in 1945. It was because they said that was the first time Master Christ could come and do this prayer because of the war. And this is very significant, because when you look at people like Barbara Marx Hubbard, who talk about the wheel of co-creation, and they talk about our birth is crisis is our birth. So she has this lovely little diagram. And you can see this is the wheel of co-creation. And then you can see here, this is at the Center for Integral Wisdom.
Yes,
that's where
of course. Yes.
This bottom one is the cosmo-erotic humanism. She says our crisis is our birth. And so that was the time because of the war. And they say this right on their website. They talk about how like they were, people were devastated by the war. They invoke these crises in order to then have the opportunity for the births. And this is all about this spiral of evolution. You talked about the, incorporating Darwinism. These people, which now that it's evolved, the Theosophy to the Anthropical Society to the then there was the New Age, and now it's New Thought. They just keep rebranding, but ultimately these New Thought leaders, and they're not fringe people. I mean, this is the underpinnings of the UN. When you look at, you talked about the Aquarian conspiracy, right? The Aquarian Age. This is Marilyn Ferguson. Marilyn Ferguson was the name of Willis Harman's assistant. Willis Harman wrote the document. He was the project director for Changing Images of Man, right? The final publication was in 1982, but they were working on it in the 60s. They did one edition in 1974, and then they released the final one in 1982. But, that was a pretty extensive document right around the same time. And it was all about ushering in the age of Aquarius. That's the whole basis of that document. But it was a pretty creepy document where, again, you're talking, we'll get to Tavistock, because those are Tavistock people, but it's all interconnected. So when these people, it was all the psychologists from Tavistock who are at Stanford Research Institute, which is a Tavistock offshoot, but the same people, he called himself Bill Harman in this document, but it's the same Willis Harman who was working on Changing Images of Man, and that was under Stanford Research Institute around the same time. This was in, I think, 1970. Or it might have been 1972, actually. It might have been around the same year.
I think the period between 70 and 74 was really big for them.
Well, so this document is Abraham Maslow, who, of course, was Esalen, Tavistock, right? Abraham, and I'm actually a second cousin, once removed. It's through marriage. I think it's second or third, but we're pretty closely related, but it is through marriage. So he was working on this. Most people are familiar with his work on self-actualization, and people think of that as personal self-actualization, right? The hierarchy of needs, the pyramid that he did. However, this document that he was working on was called Politics 3. He didn't finish it before he died, and so it was his wife who brought it to them, and then the Stanford Research Institute put this together, Politics 3. It was at the same time they're doing the Changing Images of Man. It's also Stanford Research Institute, and it's all about holistic politics, holistic with an H, and it's the same. It's all about Psyche values. So it goes hand in hand with this Age of Aquarius that they're trying to usher in the Stanford Research Institute. It documents Changing Images of Man, and then in 2000, they did Changing Images 2000, and that was the Fetzer Institute. The Fetzer Institute is tied in with this whole New Age movement as well, or now it's called New Thought. They are very well known for launching CASEL. Some people know it as SEL, Social Emotional Learning. That's, proliferating in all the schools right now. But it's this whole idea that, we have to move to a post-industrial age. And it's all about ushering the Aquarius, which is essentially it's all about, ideas and thought. And it's very Gnostic, right? Through theosophy means divine wisdom. And they believe that through theurgy, which is the divine work, that they can become gods, essentially.
Yes. And this is. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping.
No,
I was just
okay.
going to introduce. So what I was going to say, Courtney, is this is where this Christ consciousness.
Out there.
No, because this is where it breaks down so beautifully, and it's really important to go back in history at each one of these doors and open these doors, because I think it's important. This is where the current Christ consciousness concept is really just it's a reworking, it's a reseduction of the same sort of stuff of Gnosticism, which is that the divine spark is within the humans, within the material human secular humanity, and we can achieve some great apotheosis from everyone coming together into the great world government that we are going to have someday. And I'll refer you, Courtney, if you haven't read it, I've been reading a book by a man named Robert Q. Benson. Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, join us every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on Rockfin, Rumble, my X/Twitter at Guard Goldsmith, and now on YouTube.
This hour of Free Talk Live is brought to you by Dash Digital Cash. Dash is the cryptocurrency designed to be used for spending. Rising fees have made Bitcoin useless for purchases, but Dash continues to have fees less than 1 cent per transaction, and its features ensure Dash is undefeated as the most useful cryptocurrency in the marketplace. From a technical standpoint, Dash transactions are irreversible, and its network is protected from 51% attacks by their Chainlocks technology. There's no need to wait for a confirmation before considering a Dash transaction complete, so it's great for merchants. Dash is one of the oldest cryptocurrencies and is widely available on exchanges, including the decentralized Maya protocol, and in multi-crypto wallets. It's easy to get and use Dash. Start by learning more at Dash.org. Big thanks to the Dash DAO for sending us 32 Dash per month to promote Dash on the air. Visit Dash.org to learn about Dash. Dash.org.
From Feature Story News in New York, I'm Sally Patterson. The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in Rafah. The ruling comes as the United Nations top court continues its probe into whether Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Israel strongly denies the charges and the case brought by South Africa. William Denzelo reports from The Hague, where the ICJ is based.
It was an overwhelming ruling from the 15-member panel of the ICJ, 13-2, ordering Israel to cease its military operation in Rafah to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza as well. The ICJ has ordered Israel to, within a month, check back in to ensure they're complying with this order, also to allow unhindered access when it comes to UN investigators into Gaza going forward as well. Israel has long maintained that it is complying with international humanitarian law, and it's doing what it can to protect civilian life. But the message from the ICJ is overwhelming, that they say that Israel needs to do more on that front.
This comes as the United Nations resumes transporting humanitarian aid arriving at a US-built pier off the coast of the Gaza Strip. Deliveries were halted earlier this week for security reasons, while some aid was intercepted by Palestinians. In other news, Friday marks 2 years since the Uvalde school massacre, where a gunman killed 19 children and 2 teachers in their classrooms in the US state of Texas. Earlier this week, the families sued Texas state troopers for their delayed response to what is the worst school shooting in the state's history. Tony Waterman has more.
The families say the pain has been worsened by the lack of accountability over law enforcement's botched response. Officers waited 77 minutes to confront the gunman. A private investigator for the city of Uvalde cleared all local officers of wrongdoing earlier this year, and families are now anxiously awaiting the outcome of a grand jury investigation to see if any of the nearly 400 officers who responded will be criminally charged.
And fake accounts posting about the US presidential election are spreading across X, formerly known as Twitter, according to new research. A study, first published by Reuters news agency, monitoring posts on the social media platform, found a high proportion of accounts praising former President Donald Trump and criticizing President Joe Biden are not real. This comes as both presidential candidates ramp up their campaign efforts, with less than 6 months to go until Americans head to the polls. From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
Yep, we still do email. Drop your email address in the entry box at freetalklive.com, and you'll be kept in the loop with Free Talk Live.
Free Talk Live. Welcome back to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live. Remember, you can find Liberty Conspiracy every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Rumble, Rockfin, YouTube, as well as my X. That's at Guard Goldsmith. And please check out the Sunday News Assembly and all of my Substack entries over at the Garden Goldsmith Substack. We continue with our conversation with the great Courtney Turner in our conversation about the Tavistock Institute and this new term, Christ consciousness. And Robert Hugh Benson was one of three brothers of the one of three sons of the Archbishop of Canterbury at the turn of the 18th into the 1800s into the 1900s. He was the brother. His brother was E.F. Benson, who was a horror writer, very well-known short story horror writer. Robert Hugh Benson had been a priest in the Anglican Church, and he left the Anglican Church and converted to Catholicism and became a bishop in the Catholic Church. And he wrote a book that many people, I didn't even know about it. I just happened across it because I was looking for E.F. Benson short stories, you know? And I was like, oh, Robert Hugh Benson, who's that? And then I found out this whole family connection. So literally his dad was the head of the Anglican Church, and he left the British Church. He left it, joined the Catholic Church, and he wrote this book called Lord of the World. And this is exactly, and in 1907, he wrote this book about the Masons, about the Fabian Socialists, about how they were building on the Gnostic idea, and whether it's Gnostic or Hermetic. And if people aren't familiar, you got the Gnostic, which is sort of the earth-based, person-based, the wisdom comes from the people, we're all magic inside, that sort of theosophical, every religion is perfectly fine, and the God is man, that sort of thing, versus the Hermetic, which is out of the sky of Saturn is going to come Hermes, he's going to come down with his wisdom. It's not Christ, it's some other thing. They're both satanic. They're both satanic.
And I really, there's big G Gnosticism, which was they were considered heretics to Christianity, and that's like, a literal sect that had cropped up, in early Christian times. But I really put little G Gnosticism, and under that umbrella, I would include Hermeticism, alchemist, some of these, even, really the new thought leaders, the Marxism, all of it falls under little G Gnostic umbrella. It's really just the transhumanists, which Barbara Marx Hubbard is a transhumanist. A lot of these new thought leaders are transhumanists. And it's really, as you said, it's this idea that and they have nuanced differences between them, but essentially it is the idea that, through this gnosis, the esoteric knowledge, that they can become gods. We can become gods.
Right.
But and it is tied to planetary. So when I was talking about Robert Mueller, he talks about planetary politics. And this is where this whole Gaia religion comes from. Yes. And it's a lot of the theosophists. They believe that Earth, that Mother Nature, that is God, but that we are one with Mother Nature. So we become God through the Gaia religion, essentially. And I'm oversimplifying for the sake of this because to go through all the details of it would be lengthy. But that is essentially, that's the crux of it. That is what they believe. And that's why they worship the earth. They don't believe that there's a creator who created earth and that we have dominion over the earth or that we should, cultivate the earth. They believe that the earth is essentially God and that we can become one with God. It's all about oneness. It's a monistic philosophy, religion, whatever you want to call it. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I at times, if you apply logic to the concept of Hermeticism, and Hermes and things like that, and the the blessed wisdom coming down with the Enlightenment, a very Luciferian thing. Again, if you break that down, it always reduces to man-made concepts, man-made, materialist. It's only of the physical world. Well, where does that all come from? So you're right. The end point is still, as you say, it's still Gnostic with a little g. That's a very, very good insight, because I always found when people thought that there was this distinction between Hermeticism and Gnosticism, I was like, well, they lead you to the same point. They come from the same origin. Yeah. Yes. And people say they don't, but if you logically break it down, they do. They come from the mind of men. That's all. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think there are differences. That's why I put the little g umbrella around them. Yeah. And there is a difference between Hermeticists and, big G Gnosticism. There definitely is. But I think
in history.
Yes,
especially in history,
historically,
yeah. And the way that Hermeticism sort of got folded into Christianity for a while by certain
and to
people.
Judaism. I mean, the Kabbalah the Kabbalah went through many iterations. I mean, the Lurianic Kabbalah, I think, really mystified Kabbalism altogether.
This is odd. It's so funny because I don't bring a lot of this stuff up on my show. This is great. This is so great because I don't talk to many people about this. You're just this is so great. And that's why one of the reasons I love listening to your programs, because typically I'll hear things and I'm like, yeah, I've been investigating that. Oh, the other thing I want to mention to you is, first of all, when we get back to Tavistock, I'll mention the Paul Joseph Watson, Steve Watson thing. But this Lord of the World book, if you get a chance over at the Internet Archive, look up Lord of the World, Internet Archive, Lord of the World. There's an audio version of it. It's very good. It's one of those LibriVox things where people read different chapters, from around the world. They'll record MP3s. Yeah, it's called Lord of the World by Robert Hugh Benson. And when you hear it, what I found out about this book, and this is why, I believe that there are, and you don't want to sound like, you've seen it or you recognize it that well. You don't want to have that sort of hubris, but I believe that God gives you signals. And every once in a while, you sort of in a humble way say, I think maybe that was a signal. I'm not sure, look into this, let's check this out. Discovering this book, I found out that many critics think that there actually should not be what they typically are two major Western dystopian novels of the 20th century, 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Yeah, I think there could be many, many more, if people want to really look into those things. But
Fahrenheit 451 looks like it's
Fahrenheit. Yeah, Anthem is a novella, Fahrenheit 451. I mean, even my friend Bill Nolan's book, Logan's Run, that he wrote with George Clayton Johnson. So you have those books, right? They're big ones. But this guy said, this Lord of the World, when you read literally, and I read the first few pages of it, when you read the first chapter of it, you're just like, holy smoke. He even gets into travel controls for different types of cars that the different levels of people can use on the roads, and some people just can't use them. I mean, it's the 15-minute city. He's really on the ball with this stuff.
And when did he write this?
It was published in 1907.
Okay, so right around the time Tavistock was forming.
Interesting. So let's talk about Tavistock, because Tavistock. So as we talk about Christ consciousness, people might say, well, are you talking about parallel things here? You've gone back a little bit to theosophy and so on. And as you said, the reason you have to sort of blunt start with theosophy and these things, and there are strands that go even further back, as we say, all the way back to differences in ways people might interpret Plato and Aristotle, Immanuel Kant.
Neoplatonism,
Yes, Platonism and things like that, all the way back to ancient Egyptian
I highly recommend
alchemy.
This book. I know people find him controversial, but this is it's Lyndon LaRouche. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a campaigner. He wrote, this is called The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elite. I'll put it up in case anybody wants to take a look. But he talks about the dialectical positioning and how Aristotle and Plato were pitted against each other and kind of cherry picked and weaponized. And it's really fascinating. I don't agree with his full analysis on the Neoplatonists, but well, I still think it's a really
we'll have to have a
valuable
conversation about that. That would be
Okay.
great. Have like a reading group or something. But
Yeah.
but I was picking up some strains about that when I found out there was a book about Machiavelli and how
Mhm.
somebody said,
Yeah,
you know, if
I
you really
agree.
look. Yes, I think I was in a chat and I mentioned Machiavelli when you were doing one of your live streams because
Okay.
it seems like Machiavelli. What was the family that took over in Italy at the time? And he had actually approached them to try to get a job, but it seems like the prince is actually sarcastic. Like
I think
he wrote
so.
it.
Just like
to-
I think the Republic was, I think the
and
Republic has been
that's
weaponized.
I think
as
I
a
brought that up in
blueprint.
your chat. That was exactly what I was thinking. I was like, man, have I seen Plato wrong this whole time? Was the Republic actually done tongue in cheek?
I think it
You know?
was.
It's
I think
incredible
so.
to consider. I mean, one of the most foundational things that you think all this time, Plato was in favor of this total tyrannical control. He influenced so many people years down the line for that same sort of concept. He, of course, was into Plato was into Pythagoras. Pythagoras was into Egyptian alchemy.
Yes.
You know, the whole. And as I mentioned, you watch Wizard of Oz. When the Scarecrow gets the Enlightenment. He misquotes the Pythagorean theorem because it's all, and of course we know that L. Frank Baum was the Theosophist, so it's all connected. These historical ties are right in front of us, right?
Yes.
But that Plato thing is very interesting. We'll have to talk about that because
should.
it was the funniest thing to hear you talk about that because I had been wondering the same thing. Once I was exposed to the alternate view of Machiavelli and the Prince, I thought, wait a minute. What about Plato? Because some of that stuff is so nuts. Like,
I'm so glad to hear somebody say this. Yes. Well, we'll have to do a longer show on it, but I think that because when you read things like the Timaeus, when you read the Sophists, when you read Socrates, the trial of Socrates, I mean, just even the whole Socratic method, it flies in the face of somebody who would write the Republic as being something to be taken as a blueprint.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. Especially someone who, and this is one of the things that always bothered me. So I thought to myself, look, why would I understand their problem with the polytheistic versus monotheistic question of Socrates, reducing it and so on and so forth. Aristotle is quite interesting when you talk about the prime mover because he doesn't necessarily say that the mover is a creator. So that's very interesting.
I know. And I've had so many arguments with people on this and they're so condescending with me about it. And I'm like, well, just really think, like, I don't feel like you're actually reading Aristotle. I think they're reading Aristotle through Aquinas. And Aquinas is really trying to put Aristotle into the fold of Christianity. And Aristotle wasn't a Christian. I mean, it was proto-Christianity.
Yeah, right.
So he couldn't be. And that's not derogatory. That's just, he was it was before Christ. So.
Yeah. Right. But, it's interesting. And I know we're sort of going on tangent here, but it's interesting. No, Courtney, because I had a lot of these questions when I was teaching philosophy for the students, because for me, Aristotle, I always admired Aristotle and, he was as Aquinas called him the philosopher, that sort of thing. Right. So he covered so many things, whether it's marine biology or politics or theater, whatever. Right. So, but, one of the things to give Aristotle an out is to say, okay, even if he doesn't say explicitly that the prime mover, the unmoved mover. Is a creator, there is possibly, and this is where you get into Aquinas, he sort of makes this assumption for Aristotle to bring it into Christianity. But there is sort of a possibility that you can assume that that's what he meant, that the eternal being is the unmoved mover, and that when he talks about moving, he means thought. Logos.
And I think so. But even if you were to frame it that way, that's not a creator in the sense of a Christian or even a biblical creator who is with us. Who
in a personal.
Yeah, it's not. It's like a creation and then it's done. It's a fixed creation, right?
And interesting enough, there you get to Jefferson and the deists, because they had the similar sort of thing. It's the clock. He created the clock and let it run. There's no personal interpretation. And the concept of salvation there is extremely important.
Yeah,
because that there. I think. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say he was also kind of the first to, I don't think he codified it the way Locke did, but this idea of the tabula rasa, right? The blank slate. And then again, it is through, I feel like it kind of paved the way. People criticize me when I say this. I'm not saying it was Gnostic, but I think it paved the way for Gnostic meditation.
Well, and I think, you were bringing up some really good points about Immanuel Kant and the sort of occultist, esoteric, almost alchemist type of approaches of Immanuel Kant that people look at as, the great logician, and it is quite interesting to, we'll have to explore that at a different time. But so we touch on, we touch on these ideas. We've got theosophy. We've got different strains of funding going into Madame Blavatsky and others at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. We have that massive influence on British culture, which itself is influenced by British royalty, by European royalty, by European bankers, by Masonic influences and alchemical influences going way, way back. So there's a big Masonic blood tie, familial tie, Fabian socialist tie, as they start to get everything together into this Gnostic, you've got the spark in you idea, at the same time that they're pushing this, we've got to support the little guy thing, we're going to invade the institutions, we're going to take over the universities, and then you've got culture. And that's where the Tavistock Institute, I think, really comes in, because you have the introduction of psychology as a so-called science, and you have popular entertainment, popular culture, and propaganda. And so I'd love for you to touch on, let's talk about Tavistock. And I'll just mention right now, one of the curious things that came about on that 7/7 bombing at King's Cross that Steve Watson and Paul Joseph Watson uncovered was there was one bus that they had put a bomb on this bus, right? This, the so-called terrorists, right? In London. And they took the bus. And they blew up the bomb on the bus. They blew it up across the street from the Wellington House where Tavistock started.
When was this?
In 7707 or whatever it was, 7707, when they did the King's Cross bombing thing. And Steve Watson, it was an unnumbered bus. It wasn't on any schedule. It wasn't even supposed to be running, but they said, oh, there's a bomb on this bus. They drove the bomb, and it was like a celebratory explosion in front of the very place where the Tavistock Institute was created. So that was a big sign for me. I was like, there's no reason that they would do that. That's ridiculous. But they did it. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Oh, yeah, it's wild. So let's talk about what we're seeing now with Christ consciousness and these ties to this thing called the Tavistock Institute, and when it started, sort of how it started, and then take it from there if you can, Courtney.
So we'll start with kind of the now and go backwards. But if anybody wants to go to their website, I'm sure they're going to scrub it because I've talked about it so much. But their website right now, they actually have a page where they say that they're recruiting Gnostic reticulous. They say, this is a great awakening, Gnostic reticulous. This is your time. I mean, they're not really hiding it at this point. So if anybody doubts that that's what's behind all of this, this is very much a Gnostic, theosophical, kind of a cult, really.
And such a waste, too.
What?
It's such a waste. It's such a waste of people's energies. I just tell it's just like, oh man, everybody's searching for something. It's like, it's very obvious. It's very obvious. It's right in front of you. It's like, so as I mentioned, physics doesn't create itself. It has to, by nature, come from something metaphysical. Once you get that nugget that the world around you has been created, then you can start to look into history and you realize, oh, Christ existed, and the accounts of Christ from people who had nothing to do with it are all confirmed. And it's if that's what you need, you can find it.
Sure. Yeah. So with Tavistock, I go all the way back to Wilhelm Wundt, because you were talking about like it being a science, right? And it's he was really one of the first to call himself a psychologist. He's kind of the grandfather of psychology. The title in America is often given to William James, who was actually one of his disciples and one of the first American PhDs. Wilhelm Wundt became chair at Leipzig University. So who is it? It's Anthony Sutton, and he talks a lot about it in this book.
Yeah.
And I don't have the other book in front of me, but it's a tiny little book, and I do recommend it. Both Sutton and Charlotte Iserbyt used a book called The Leipzig Connection, and it's by Klaas and Leone. Although I think this new edition only puts Leone's name on it, but I don't know why that is. But it's a tiny, like 150-page book, and it outlines really all the connections from Leipzig University, which is where Wilhelm Wundt was the philosophy chair, and that was in 1875. In 1875.
Okay.
So right around the same time that the Theosophical Society was being formed, with, of course, all the Fabians, and the Fabians were really behind the Wellington House as well. We'll get there in just a minute. But he was like one of the first to call himself a psychologist, and he brought this notion of essentially treating humans as he was a behavioral psychologist, and really, he had the lab experiments, and he really treated humans like lab rats. So some of his disciples, he was the first to create the PhD, which I think was kind of like the pinnacle of indoctrination. Yeah. And so there was, I'm trying to think how many were there. In 15 years, he ended up having something like 620 students. So he taught a lot of people. And some of his students were people like G. Stanley Hall, who was the mentor to Dewey, right? John Dewey, who was very instrumental in exporting the Prussian model of education to the United States. Wundt himself was a Hegelian. I think that's important to know, because all of these people have kind of Hegelian leanings. And certainly when you get to the New Thought leaders, I showed you that spiral. This is very reminiscent, in my opinion, of the Hegelian dialectic spiral. If you've seen that spiral, which in my opinion is a Gnostic Jacob's ladder. That's what I think it is.
The perfectibility of man through man, and through basically collectivism, and the so-called dialectical progress of dialectical materialism, all really directed by the people who want to direct it. That's the thing.
Exactly. Yep. And when you get to these New Thought leaders, they literally say, where is all this going? It is transhumanism. And people like Bruce Lipton will talk about how the next stage, so the top part of this, the wheel of co-creation. Who are we co-creating with? We are co-creating with God, right? Because we become gods. And so they say we have this choice. We can choose to go extinct. You were talking about Darwinism before. They say they reject Darwinism because the part of Darwinism that they don't like is the competition, the natural selection, because that breeds individualism. They can't have that. So I actually think they're neo-Darwinists. They reject it. They say they're not Darwinists at all. But I really think it's neo-Darwinism. It's very much kind of like the neo, Marxists. Like, they say they rejected Marxism, but really they just cherry picked the aspects that they liked.
That's an interesting point, Courtney. They would have to reject Darwinism, because Darwinism has, as part of its theory, is that certain traits are more advantageous than other traits. Certain behaviors are more advantageous than other behaviors. So they can't have that, because everybody's got to be the same bland everything and have no differential in their qualities or their skills or their abilities in any way whatsoever, except based on of course, the final rule from the rulers, who will decide what is a good or bad trait, right? So they can't have any differences in people, or any sort of merit in any way, and including through selective, Darwin,
and they can't have the
survival of the fittest.
That's what they really say. So they say we have this choice. We can now co-create, and we can choose to evolve to the next stage. Of course, Bruce Lipton gives this whole analogy, and I won't bore you with all of it, but essentially he talks about how we evolve, and it's the membrane that's really where we get our intelligence. So of course you have the amoebas, and then you have the multicellular organism.
The membrane.
Yes. Yeah. He says, and the human beings are so intelligent because we're complex, multicellular organisms, and we have so much surface area of membrane. And this means that intelligence is, we collect through the membrane. And so he says we have this choice. We can now evolve to the next stage, which would be a superorganism of humanity. Otherwise, we can choose to go extinct. But if we want to evolve, we can become superorganism humanity. And what does he think the membrane of humanity will be? It is the internet. So all of this is driving towards the AI world society, right? The UN 100, their book that Michael Dukakis, the former governor of Massachusetts, wrote, it's called Remaking the World, the Age of Global Enlightenment, which is a very theosophical nod, right? In the enlightened one, one might think the illuminated one, who brings the light. That would be the light bearer, Lucifer.
And so Courtney, as a quick aside, I just have to mention to you that I have a novel. I actually started it in 1988 called T-Miser. And it comes from when I was at Boston University, and we would skip the turnstiles to get on the subway, and they had the little tokens. We created this whole idea of a dystopian future world. Mike Dukakis is the bad guy. Thanks for listening to Liberty Conspiracy on Free Talk Live.
On Free Talk Live, we're bringing people to the ideas of liberty every day. From wrestling superstars like Glenn Jacobs.
You guys really are having an impact, I believe. Like I said, a lot of where I am now is due to listening to Free Talk Live. You changed my mind on some very important issues years ago.
To random people tuning in on the radio.
I was kind of stuck in the left-right paradigm. I heard your show by chance on a Saturday night. From there, I went on, joined the Free State Project, and become an amplifier. So, I mean, that's really the reason why I amp